The morning Alara Wren's life was sold started like any other, which was to say, it started badly. She'd been awake since before dawn, scrubbing floors in the boarding house where her mother worked, trying to pretend she didn't hear the men downstairs discussing her family like livestock at market. The Wrens were broke. Worse than broke. They were indebted to Marcus Thornby, the man who owned half the town and wanted to own the other half. $3,000, she'd heard someone say through the floorboards. That's what Jacob Wren owes. Might as well be $3 million for all the chance he has of paying it. Alara had scrubbed harder, her knuckles raw against the rough wood. Now, standing in front of the church with the entire town gathered like vultures to a carcass, she understood what those whispered conversations had been building toward. Her father stood beside her, shoulders hunched, looking 20 years older than he had last month. Her mother clutched Alara's hand so tightly it hurt. "There has to be another way," her mother whispered, voice breaking. There wasn't. They all knew it. Marcus Thornby stood on the church steps like a king, surveying his domain, thumbs hooked in his vest pockets. He was smiling, the kind of smile that made Alara's skin crawl. "The debt is clear," Thornby announced, voice carrying across the assembled crowd. $3,000 owed to me by Jacob Wren. Payment due today, or I take possession of their home, their business, and anything else of value. He let that last part hang in the air. Everyone knew what he meant. In a town where daughters were often the only currency desperate families had left, anything else of value had a very specific meaning. Alara's father finally spoke, his voice so quiet she almost didn't hear it. "Please, give me more time. I'll find a way." "You've had time, Jacob. 6 months of it." Thornby's smile widened. "But I'm not an unreasonable man. I'm willing to accept alternative arrangements." The way he looked at Alara when he said it made her stomach turn. She'd known this was coming. Had known it for weeks, ever since her father's business partner had fled town with their savings, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises behind. She'd watched her father age a decade in days, watched her mother's hands shake as she counted coins that would never add up to enough. And she'd known, the way women in desperate situations always know, that eventually someone would suggest the obvious solution. She just hadn't expected it to be quite so public. "No." The word came out stronger than she'd intended. Alara stepped forward, pulling her hand from her mother's grip. "You're not taking anything else from my family." Thornby's expression shifted, amusement flickering across his face. "Brave words, girl, but unless you've got $3,000 hidden in that worn-out dress, I don't see how you're in a position to—" "I'll pay it." The voice came from the back of the crowd, low and rough as gravel. Heads turned. Alara turned too, trying to see who'd spoken. The crowd parted and Rowan Hales stepped through. Alara had seen him before. Everyone in town had, though he rarely came down from his ranch in the mountains. He was the kind of man people talked about in whispers, a loner who'd built his property from nothing, who could break a wild horse or track a wolf through a blizzard, who'd once killed 3 men who'd tried to rustle his cattle. Or so the stories went. He was older, 40, maybe 45, with gray threading through dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn work clothes that had seen better days. He walked like a man who'd forgotten how to hurry, each step deliberate. Thornby's smile faltered. "Hale, didn't expect to see you in town." "I'll pay the debt," Rowan repeated, stopping a few feet from the church steps. His eyes moved to Alara, then away. 3,000. Cash. The crowd erupted in whispers. Alara felt her mother's hand clutch at her arm again. Thornby recovered quickly, his smile returning sharper than before. "Well now, that's generous of you, Hale. Very generous. But the debt is owed to me, and I have the right to set the terms of repayment. If Jacob can't pay, then I claim—" "I'm not paying Jacob's debt," Rowan cut him off. His voice hadn't gotten louder, but something in it made Thornby stop talking. "I'm buying it from you. $3,000 for the debt and all associated claims. That's more than fair market price for paper." It took Alara a moment to understand what he was doing. He wasn't paying off her father's debt. He was purchasing it, transferring the ownership from Thornby to himself, which meant her family would still owe $3,000. They'd just owe it to him instead. Thornby's jaw tightened. For a moment, Alara thought he might refuse, might push back just because he could, but then his eyes shifted to Rowan's face, and whatever he saw there made him reconsider. Fine, Thornby said shortly. 3,000, cash, and the debt transfers to you, along with all rights to collect on it however you see fit. Agreed. The transaction took less than 10 minutes. Rowan counted out the money. Actual cash, more money than Alara had ever seen in one place, and Thornby signed over the debt papers with sharp, angry strokes of his pen. The whole time, Alara stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. Her father looked relieved. Her mother looked terrified. And Alara didn't know what she felt. When the papers were signed and the money exchanged, Rowan folded the documents and tucked them into his coat pocket. Then finally he turned to look at Alara directly. "You'll need to get your things," he said. Not a question. A statement. Her mother made a sound like a wounded animal. "Wait," Alara managed. What exactly are you expecting?" Something flickered in Rowan's expression, too quick to read. "Your family owes me $3,000. They can't pay it, so you'll come work it off at my ranch. That's the arrangement." "Work it off," she repeated slowly. "Cooking, cleaning, mending, general labor. I'll provide room and board. Whatever you earn beyond your keep gets credited against the debt." It sounded reasonable, almost fair even, which was why Alara didn't believe it for a second. "And how long would that take?" she asked. "Working off $3,000 at, what, a few dollars a month after expenses?" Rowan's expression didn't change. "Long as it takes?" "So, basically forever." "Probably." At least he was honest about it. That was something, she supposed. Her father stepped forward, looking like he wanted to say something, but Rowan's gaze shifted to him and the words died in his throat. "You got something to add, Jacob?" Her father swallowed hard. "She's my daughter. I can't just—" "You already did." Rowan's voice was flat, without judgment, but also without sympathy. "The moment you borrowed money you couldn't pay back, using her as collateral, you made this choice. I'm just giving you a better option than Thornby would have." Alara's father flinched like he'd been struck. The worst part was that Rowan was right. Her father had borrowed the money, knowing the risk, knowing what would happen if he couldn't repay it. He'd gambled with his daughter's future and lost. "I need to talk to her," her mother said suddenly. "Alone. Please." Rowan nodded once. "Make it quick. I want to be back before dark." Her mother pulled Alara away from the crowd, into the shadow of the church where they couldn't be overheard. Her hands were shaking. "Baby, you don't have to do this," she whispered. "We'll find another way. There is no other way, Mama." Alara kept her voice steady, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "You know that. If I don't go with him, Thornby takes everything. At least this way you and Papa have a roof over your heads." "But you don't know this man. You don't know what he'll—" Her mother's voice broke. "What he'll expect from you." Alara had been trying very hard not to think about that part. She'd heard stories about what happened to women in her position. About men who called it working off a debt, but expected something else entirely. But she'd also heard other stories about Rowan Hale. That he'd been married once, years ago. That his wife had died in childbirth along with their baby. That he'd lived alone on that mountain ranch ever since, barely coming to town except for supplies. A man who'd lost everything might be cruel. Or he might just be empty. She didn't know which would be worse. "I'll be careful," she told her mother. "And if things aren't what he says, I'll find a way to leave." "How? You'll be miles from town with no money and no way to—" "I'll find a way," Alara repeated, with more confidence than she felt. "I'm not helpless, Mama. You taught me better than that." Her mother pulled her into a fierce embrace, and Alara let herself hold on for a moment, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender soap and wood smoke. Then she pulled back, squared her shoulders, and walked back to where Rowan waited. "I'll need an hour to pack," she said. He nodded. "I'll wait." Mchetka. The house where Alara had grown up suddenly seemed smaller as she moved through it, gathering her belongings. She didn't have much. A few dresses, some underclothings, a brush that had been her grandmother's, a book of poetry her mother had given her years ago. Everything fit in one small trunk. Her younger brother, Thomas, watched from the doorway of the room they'd shared, his face pale and scared. He was only 12, too young to understand all of this, but old enough to know something terrible was happening. "Are you coming back?" he asked. Alara closed the trunk, the latch clicking into place with a finality that made her chest tight. "I don't know." That man, he seems mean. He seems quiet, Alara corrected. That's not the same thing, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. When she came back downstairs, her father was sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, his eyes red-rimmed. Alara, Don't, she said quietly. Just don't. If he apologized, she might break. If he tried to justify it, she might scream. Either way, she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. She picked up her trunk, heavier than it should have been, weighted with everything she was leaving behind, and walked out the door. Rowan was waiting with a wagon, 2 horses already hitched and restless. He took the trunk from her without a word and loaded it into the back. Then he offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. Alara hesitated, looking at his outstretched hand. Calloused, scarred, capable of violence or kindness, or maybe just indifference. She didn't know him, didn't know what the next hour or day or year would bring, but she took his hand anyway because what other choice did she have? The wagon lurched forward, and the town began to fall away behind them. They rode in silence for the first hour. The road, if you could call it that, wound up into the foothills, growing rougher and narrower as they climbed. The town disappeared behind a ridge, and then it was just pine trees and granite outcroppings and the endless sky. Alara kept her hands folded in her lap, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Rowan sat beside her, handling the reins with easy competence, his expression unreadable. Finally, she couldn't stand the silence anymore. How far is your ranch? Another 2 hours? Do you have other workers there? No. So it'll just be, us. Yes. She waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. You're not much of a talker, she observed. No. Alara bit back a frustrated laugh. This was going to be a long 2 hours. A long several years, probably. Can I ask you something? She said. Why did you do it? Buy the debt, I mean. You don't know me. You don't owe my family anything. Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, I needed help at the ranch. You needed a way out. Seemed straightforward enough. You could have just hired someone. You didn't have to pay $3,000. Could have. Didn't want to. Why not? He glanced at her, just for a second, then back at the road. Because hired help leaves when they feel like it. This way you'll stay until the work is done. It was honest, at least. Brutally so. He wasn't pretending this was charity or kindness. It was a transaction, pure and simple. He'd bought her labor, and he expected to get what he'd paid for. And what happens if I try to leave anyway? She asked. Then I report the debt as defaulted, and Thornby gets to collect however he sees fit. From your family. Alara's hands tightened in her lap. So that was the leverage, not her family. If she ran, they'd pay the price. That's a pretty effective chain, she said quietly. It's the truth, that's all. They rode on. The sun climbed higher, warm on Alara's face, despite the autumn chill in the air. Around them, the forest was alive with small sounds, birds calling, branches creaking, the rustle of something moving through the underbrush. It was beautiful, in a harsh sort of way. Nothing like the town with its crowded streets and judgmental whispers. What will I be doing? She asked after a while. Specifically, I mean. Ranch work. Cooking. Cleaning, like I said. Mending gear, preserving food for winter. Might need help with the animals sometimes if you're able. I can learn. Good. Another silence. Then Rowan added, almost as an afterthought, There's a spare room. You'll have privacy. And there's a lock on the door. Inside lock, I mean. So you can secure it from your side if you want. Alara turned to stare at him. Why are you telling me that? Because you're wondering what I expect from you, and I'm telling you. Work. That's all. The rest is your business. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if she believed it. Most men wouldn't bother mentioning the lock, she said carefully. I'm not most men. What are you then? He was quiet for a long moment. Tired, he said finally. Just tired. It wasn't the answer she'd expected, but something about the way he said it, flat, honest, worn down, made her think it might be the truth. Tikis. The ranch appeared as they crested a final ridge, a collection of weathered buildings nestled in a high valley, surrounded by split-rail fencing and flanked by dense forest. Mountains rose on three sides, their peaks already dusted with early snow. It was remote, isolated in a way that made Alara's chest tighten with something between awe and fear. "Welcome home," Rowan said, though his tone suggested he was talking more to himself than to her. The main house was larger than she'd expected, 2 stories built from rough-hewn logs that had darkened with age and weather. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant he'd left a fire banked before coming to town. He pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake, then climbed down and reached for her trunk. Alara descended on her own, not waiting for help this time, and looked around. Barn, stable, what looked like a chicken coop, a small structure that might have been a smokehouse. Everything was neat, well-maintained, but there was a kind of loneliness to it all, like a place built for more people than currently occupied it. "Come on," Rowan said, carrying her trunk toward the house. "I'll show you around." The interior was dim after the bright afternoon sunlight, but clean. Sparse furniture, minimal decoration, everything functional rather than comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with a kitchen area off to one side and a staircase leading up. "Your room's upstairs," Rowan said, heading for the stairs. "Second door on the right." Alara followed him up. The hallway was narrow, with 4 doors leading off it. He pushed open the second one, revealing a small bedroom, single bed, dresser, wash basin, window overlooking the valley. Simple, but not uncomfortable. He set her trunk at the foot of the bed. "Linens are in the chest," he said, pointing. "You'll want to air them out before using them. They've been stored a while. Privy's out back about 30 yards. Chamber pot under the bed if you need it at night." He moved to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. Without looking at her, he added, "Lock's here." "Like I said." He demonstrated, a simple slide bolt on the inside of the door, sturdy enough to keep anyone out if she chose to use it. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything," he said. "Dinner's at 6. You can cook, I assume?" "Yes." "Good. Kitchen's stocked. Make whatever you want." Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Alara stood in the middle of her new room, because that's what it was now, whether she liked it or not, and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 6 hours. This morning, she'd woken up in her childhood home, dreading the day, but still surrounded by family and familiarity. Now she was alone on a mountain ranch with a stranger who'd purchased her future for $3,000, expected to work off a debt that would probably take years to repay, if it was even possible at all. She should be terrified. Part of her was. But another part, a part she didn't quite want to examine too closely, felt something else entirely. Relief, maybe. Or possibility. Or maybe just the strange, unsettling freedom that came from having absolutely nothing left to lose. Alara unpacked slowly, trying to make the sparse room feel less foreign. Her dresses went in the dresser, her brush on top of it. The poetry book she tucked under her pillow, a small rebellion, keeping something close that was entirely hers. When she was done, she went to the window and looked out at the valley below. The view was staggering. Mountains in every direction, forest stretching as far as she could see, the sky so vast it made her feel impossibly small. No neighbors, no town gossip, no one watching her every move. Just this place, and the man who owned it, and the work that waited. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and went downstairs to figure out what to make for dinner. The kitchen was better stocked than she'd expected. Flour, salt, dried beans, preserved vegetables, smoked meat hanging from hooks in the ceiling. A root cellar door led down to more supplies. Potatoes, onions, apples from last season starting to wrinkle, but still edible. Alara had learned to cook from her mother, stretching meager ingredients into meals that could feed a family. This was different, not abundance exactly, but enough. More than enough. She decided on something simple. Stew with the smoked meat and vegetables, biscuits if she could get the oven temperature right. Practical food for a practical place. As she worked, chopping vegetables and mixing dough, she found her mind settling into the rhythm of familiar tasks. This, at least, she knew how to do. This, she could control. The sun was starting to set when Rowan came in from the barn, bringing the smell of horses and hay with him. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Alara at the stove, table set for 2, the warm smell of cooking food filling the house. "Smells good," he said. "It'll be ready soon. You can wash up if you want." He nodded and disappeared into what she assumed was a washroom. When he returned, his hands and face were clean, hair damp from water. They sat down across from each other, and for a moment neither of them moved. Should I? Elara hesitated. Do you say grace? No? Oh, okay then. She served the stew, hyper-aware of every movement, every sound. This felt strange and awkward and far too domestic for two people who'd only met this morning. Rowan took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, then nodded. It's good. Thank you. You're welcome. They ate in silence for a while. Elara found herself watching him from the corner of her eye, trying to figure him out. He ate methodically, without rush, pausing occasionally to take a drink of water. His hands were scarred, she noticed, old burns, cuts that had healed crooked, the marks of hard labor. Can I ask you something? She said finally. You seem to be making a habit of that. Was that humor? His expression hadn't changed, but something in his tone suggested he might have been joking. Why do you live all the way up here? She asked. Alone, I mean. It seems lonely. Rowan was quiet for a moment, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. It is lonely, he said. That's the point. Why would you want that? Because people complicate things. They expect things. They leave. Everyone leaves? Eventually. He took another bite. Easier not to let them get close in the first place. Elara thought about that. About a man who'd built a fortress of solitude in the mountains, who'd rather be lonely than risk being hurt again. Your wife, she said quietly, the one who died. You loved her. It wasn't a question. Rowan's jaw tightened. For a second, she thought he might tell her to mind her own business. Instead, he just said, Yes. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Does that make it hurt less? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Elara saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that she'd understood something he hadn't said. No, he admitted. It doesn't. They finished the meal in silence, but it felt different now. Less awkward, more companionable, like maybe they'd found some small common ground. When they were done, Elara started to clear the plates, but Rowan stood first. I'll handle the dishes, he said. You cooked. I don't mind. Neither do I. You've had a long day. Get some rest. It felt wrong to leave him with the work, but she was exhausted, emotionally more than physically. The weight of everything that had happened was starting to crash over her. Thank you, she said, for dinner, and for... She gestured vaguely at the house, the room upstairs, the lock on the door. For not being Thornby. Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Rowan's mouth. Low bar, but I'll take it. Elara went upstairs, changed into her nightgown, and climbed into bed. The mattress was firm but not uncomfortable, the quilts heavy and warm. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. More stars than she'd ever seen in town, where lantern light drowned them out. She thought about her family. Her mother, probably crying herself to sleep. Her father, drowning in guilt. Thomas, confused and scared. She thought about Marcus Thornby and how close she'd come to a very different fate. And she thought about the man downstairs, washing dishes in silence, who'd paid $3,000 for reasons she still didn't fully understand. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, lonely, defiant, wild. Elara closed her eyes and, despite everything, slept. Achumi? The next morning arrived too early, announced by roosters she hadn't known existed and thin sunlight slicing through her window. Elara lay still for a moment, disoriented, before memory crashed back. The town, the transaction, the wagon ride, this room, this new life. She got up and dressed quickly, braiding her hair with practiced efficiency. Downstairs, she found the kitchen empty but the fire already going. Through the window, she could see Rowan heading toward the barn, shoulders hunched against the morning cold. Elara made coffee, strong and bitter the way her father liked it, and scrambled eggs from the henhouse. When Rowan came back in an hour later, she'd set breakfast on the table. Morning, he said, hanging his coat by the door. Morning, I wasn't sure when you usually ate, so I just... This is fine. Thank you. They sat, ate. The routine was already starting to form, even just one day in. What do you need me to do today? Ilara asked. Rowan considered. Can you mend? Yes. Good. There's a pile of work clothes in the mudroom. Tears, missing buttons, that sort of thing. Needs doing before winter hits hard. Anything else? I'll be working on the north fence line. If you finish the mending, there's preserves that need putting up. Jars in the cellar, fruit in the cold storage. I can do that. He nodded, stood, put his plate in the washing basin. At the door, he paused. If you need anything, ring the bell on the porch. I'll hear it. Then he was gone, and Ilara was alone with her thoughts and a mountain of work clothes to repair. She found the pile where he'd said, shirts with torn seams, pants with blown-out knees, socks that needed darning. Evidence of a life lived hard, alone, with no one to help shoulder the burden. Ilara settled into a chair by the window and got to work, needle and thread moving with the muscle memory of years of practice. Outside, the valley was waking up, birds calling, wind moving through the pines, the distant sound of Rowan working somewhere beyond sight. It was strange, this quiet. In town, there'd always been noise, voices, wagon wheels, the general chaos of people living on top of each other. Here, there was just the work and the mountain and the silence. She wasn't sure yet if she liked it or if it would drive her mad. The days began to blur together after that. Wake, cook, work, eat, sleep, repeat. Rowan kept his distance, polite but never warm, treating her exactly as he'd promised, like hired help, nothing more. He was gone most days from dawn to dusk, working on the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. Ilara learned the rhythm of the place, when to gather eggs, when to start dinner, when to leave him alone, and when a simple question wouldn't be intrusive. They didn't talk much, but sometimes, in the evening, they'd sit by the fire, him repairing tack, her darning socks, and the silence felt less empty. A week passed, then two, and Ilara started to realize something she hadn't expected. She didn't hate it here. The work was hard but satisfying. The isolation was strange but peaceful, and Rowan, for all his gruffness and emotional distance, kept his word. He gave her space. He never pushed, never expected anything beyond the work she'd agreed to. The lock on her door stayed unused, but knowing it was there mattered. One evening, as they finished dinner, Rowan cleared his throat. "You did good work on those preserves," he said. "They'll keep us through winter, no problem." It was the closest thing to praise he'd offered since she'd arrived. "Thank you," Ilara said. "I'm glad to be useful." "You are. More than I expected, honestly." She raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" He shrugged. "Wasn't sure. Most women from town don't know hard work. Thought you might be the same." "Because my father's a failed businessman?" "Because you're 19 and pretty. Usually means you've been kept from anything difficult." Ilara wasn't sure whether to be offended or flattered by pretty. She settled for honest. "My father was a dreamer. My mother was practical. Guess which one I took after?" Something that might have been respect flickered in Rowan's eyes. "Your mother." Every time. They cleaned up together, falling into a routine that was starting to feel natural. When they were done, instead of going to his room as usual, Rowan hesitated. "I'm heading out to check the north pasture tomorrow," he said. "See how the cattle are doing before the snow comes. You're welcome to come along if you want, see more of the property." It was the first time he'd invited her anywhere. "I'd like that," Ilara said. "Good, we'll leave at dawn." That night, lying in bed, Ilara found herself almost looking forward to tomorrow. Not because she was falling for her captor, she wasn't naive enough to mistake civility for affection, but because something was shifting. She was starting to understand this place, this life. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand the lonely man who'd chosen isolation over risk. Outside, the wolves howled. Inside, Ilara smiled and closed her eyes. The worst part about all of this, she thought as sleep pulled her under, was that it wasn't as terrible as it should have been. And she wasn't quite sure what that said about her. Dawn broke cold and clear, the kind of morning where your breath hung visible in the air and frost turned everything silver. Ilara dressed in layers, her warmest dress over 2 petticoats, a shawl her mother had knitted years ago, sturdy boots that had seen better days but would have to do. Rowan was already in the kitchen when she came down, packing supplies into a leather saddlebag. Dried meat, hard biscuits, a canteen of water. "We'll be gone most of the day," he said without preamble. "Dress warm, it gets colder up in the high pasture." "I'm wearing everything I own," Ilara said, pulling the shawl tighter. He glanced at her, taking in the thin fabric, the worn boots. Something crossed his face. Consideration, maybe calculation. Wait here. He disappeared upstairs and returned a few minutes later with a heavy wool coat, men's cut but clearly old, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs. It was my wife's, he said, holding it out. She was taller than you, so it'll be too big, but it's warm. Elara hesitated, her fingers brushing the rough wool. This felt intimate somehow, wearing a dead woman's clothes. But cold was cold, and pride didn't keep you warm in the mountains. Thank you, she said, slipping it on. It swallowed her, the hem hitting mid-thigh and the sleeves hanging past her hands. But he was right. It was warm. It smelled faintly of cedar and something else, something older. The ghost of lavender, maybe, from whoever had worn it last. Rowan looked away quickly. Let's go. The horses were already saddled, two sturdy mountain breeds with shaggy coats and patient eyes. Rowan's was a big bay gelding, scarred along the shoulder from what looked like an old predator attack. Alara's was smaller, a gray mare with a white blaze down her face. Her name's Smoke, Rowan said, holding the mare steady while Alara climbed into the saddle. She's steady, won't spook easy. Alara settled into the seat, adjusting her grip on the reins. It had been years since she'd ridden. Her family couldn't afford horses, but the basics came back quickly enough. They rode out as the sun crested the ridge, turning the frost to diamonds. Rowan led them up a narrow trail that switch-backed through dense pine forest, climbing steadily higher. The air grew thinner, cleaner, sharp with the scent of resin and cold stone. For the first hour, they didn't talk. Alara focused on staying balanced, on reading Smoke's movements, on not thinking about how far down the slope dropped on one side of the trail. But eventually, the path widened and they rode side by side, and the silence started to feel less necessary. How much land do you have? She asked. Couple thousand acres, give or take, runs from the valley floor up to the tree line. He gestured vaguely at the mountains rising around them. Most of it's too rough for cattle, but there's good grazing in the high meadows come summer. And you work it all yourself? Have been for 8 years now. 8 years alone on a mountain. 8 years of this silence, this isolation. Alara tried to imagine it and couldn't quite manage. Don't you go crazy? She asked. Being by yourself that long? Rowan's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Some would say I already was crazy. Why else live up here? That's not an answer. No, I suppose it's not. He was quiet for a moment, then added, You get used to it. The quiet. After a while, it's the noise you can't stand. All those people in town, talking and wanting and expecting things, it wears you down. So you ran away. His jaw tightened. I chose different. That's not the same as running. Alara thought about that. About the difference between running away and running toward something. About whether there even was a difference, really, or if it was just a story people told themselves to feel better about their choices. They crested another ridge, and suddenly the view opened up. A long alpine meadow, brown with late autumn but still beautiful, ringed by peaks that scraped the sky. And scattered across the grass, dark shapes moving slowly. Cattle. Maybe 40 or 50 head, looking fat and healthy despite the approaching winter. There they are, Rowan said, satisfaction in his voice. Came through the summer good. Should fetch a decent price come spring. They rode down into the meadow, Rowan circling the herd with a practiced eye, checking for injuries or illness. Alara hung back, watching him work. There was a confidence to his movements here, a purpose that seemed to settle something in him. This, she realized, was what he was made for. Not conversation or company, but this. The land, the animals, the honest work of keeping things alive. That one there, he said, pointing to a calf limping slightly. Might have stepped in a hole. I'll need to check her before we head back. He dismounted and approached the calf slowly, hands out, voice low and soothing. The animal backed away at first, nervous, but Rowan kept talking, not words really, just sounds, and eventually the calf let him get close enough to examine her leg. Alara watched, fascinated despite herself. This was a side of him she hadn't seen before. Gentle in a way he never was with people. He ran his hands down the calf's leg with careful precision, checking joints and tendons until he found what he was looking for. Just bruised, he called back to Alara. She'll be fine. He straightened, gave the calf a pat, and walked back to his horse. But as he reached for the reins, the bay suddenly threw its head up, ears pinned back, spooked by something Alara couldn't see. "Easy," Rowan said, reaching for the bridle. The horse reared, hooves flashing, and Rowan stumbled backward, barely avoiding being struck. The gelding bolted, thundering across the meadow with the reins trailing. "Damn it!" Rowan bit out, anger and frustration mixing in his voice. Alara didn't think. She just reacted, kicking Smoke into a gallop and chasing after the panicked horse. Wind tore at her face, the too big coat flapping around her, and for a moment all she could think about was staying in the saddle and not getting thrown into a tree. But Smoke was fast and sure-footed, closing the distance quickly. Alara leaned forward, reaching out, fingers stretching for the trailing reins. Once, twice. On the third try, she caught them. "Whoa!" she called, pulling back on both sets of reins. "Whoa! Easy now!" Both horses slowed, then stopped, sides heaving. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, adrenaline making her hands shake. When she looked back, Rowan was jogging toward her, his expression caught somewhere between relief and surprise. "That was stupid," he said when he reached them, but his voice lacked heat. "Probably," Alara agreed, handing him the reins. "But it worked. You could have been thrown, killed. I've done stupider things." She grinned, still high on adrenaline and unexpected success. Like agreeing to live on a mountain with a stranger. For a second, Rowan just stared at her. Then he laughed, actually laughed, a short bark of sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "Fair point," he said. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not friendship exactly, but recognition. Like maybe they'd been circling each other for weeks, trying to figure out who the other person was, and had just caught a glimpse of something real. They ate lunch sitting on sun-warmed rocks at the edge of the meadow, passing the canteen back and forth. The biscuits were hard and the dried meat tougher, but Alara was hungry enough not to care. "Where did you learn to ride like that?" Rowan asked. "My uncle had a farm before he died, used to visit when I was young. He taught me." Alara took another bite of biscuit. "Haven't been on a horse in years, though. Surprised I remembered how." "Some things stick with you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the cattle graze. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, patient and lethal. "Can I ask you something?" Alara said finally. "You really do make a habit of that." "It's a character flaw. I'm curious. I've noticed." She smiled despite herself. "Why did you really buy my family's debt? And don't say you needed help. You've been managing alone for 8 years. You could have kept managing." Rowan was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I saw you at the church, the way you looked at Thornby." "I looked at him like I wanted to kill him." "No. You looked at him like you refused to be broken by him, like you'd rather die than give him the satisfaction." He turned to look at her. "And I thought, there's someone who won't quit, who'll fight even when it's hopeless." Alara's throat felt tight. "That's not strength. That's just stubbornness." "Sometimes they're the same thing." "And you wanted someone stubborn working for you?" "I wanted—" He trailed off, looking back at the mountains. "I don't know what I wanted. Maybe just to see what happened if someone like you ended up somewhere like this, if it would break you or if you'd surprise me." "And am I surprising you?" His mouth curved slightly. "Every day." They rode back as the sun started its descent, taking a different trail that wound through old-growth forest, where the trees grew so thick the ground was still dark with shadow. Rowan pointed out landmarks as they went, a lightning-struck pine where he'd once cornered a mountain lion, a spring where the water ran so cold it hurt your teeth, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear. "You really love this place," Alara observed. "It's mine," Rowan said simply. "Only thing that's ever been truly mine. Everything else—" He stopped himself. "Everything else leaves," Alara finished quietly. He glanced at her, something vulnerable flickering across his face before he locked it down again. "Yeah." When they reached the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Alara slid off Smoke with legs that felt like rubber, muscles she'd forgotten she had already screaming in protest. "You'll be sore tomorrow," Rowan said, not unkindly. "I'm sore now. It gets worse before it gets better. Take a hot bath tonight. There's salts in the cupboard. They help." It was practical advice, nothing more, but the fact that he'd thought to offer it made something warm unfold in Alara's chest. They took care of the horses together, working in the easy silence they'd developed over the day. Alara found herself noticing small things, the way Rowan checked each hoof carefully for stones, the gentle way he spoke to the animals, the unconscious competence in every movement. This was who he really was, she thought. Not the gruff loner who barely spoke, but this, someone who took care of things, who noticed details, who'd spent 8 years alone because it was easier than risking connection again. Dinner that night was simple, leftover stew reheated, bread Alara had baked that morning. But the conversation came easier than it had before, punctuated by comfortable silences and the occasional observation about the day. "You did good today," Rowan said as they cleaned up. "With Smoke, I mean, and catching Dancer when he bolted." "Dancer?" Alara raised an eyebrow. "You named your horse Dancer?" "My wife did, said he moved like he was dancing when he ran." Rowan's expression went distant for a moment. Seemed cruel to change it after she died. It was the most he'd ever said about his wife in one go. Alara treaded carefully. "What was her name, your wife?" "Sarah." He said it quietly, like a prayer or a wound. "Sarah Hale." "How long were you married?" 3 years, not long enough." He set down the dish he'd been drying. "She wanted children, wanted the house full of noise and life. I built this place for her, thinking we'd fill it together. And then she—" His voice caught. "Labor went wrong. Baby was breech. By the time we got her to town, it was too late for either of them." "I'm sorry," Alara said, knowing it was inadequate but not knowing what else to say. "It was my fault. If I hadn't brought her up here, if we'd stayed in town where there was a doctor nearby. You don't know that." "Don't I?" His eyes were hard when he looked at her. "Women die in childbirth all the time, Alara. But they die faster when they're hours from help." Alara thought about her mother's warning the day she'd left. You don't know what he'll expect from you, but looking at Rowan now, seeing the raw grief still fresh after 8 years, she understood something she hadn't before. He wasn't afraid of expecting too much from her. He was afraid of letting himself want anything at all. "It wasn't your fault," she said firmly. "Life's cruel sometimes. That doesn't make it your fault." "You sound very certain about that." "I am. My father made bad decisions that cost us everything. But me being here? That's not his fault. It's just what happened. Blaming him won't change anything." Rowan studied her for a long moment. "You're more forgiving than I'd be." "I'm not forgiving him. I'm just choosing not to carry his guilt on top of my own problems." She dried the last plate and set it aside. "Life's hard enough without weighing yourself down with things you can't change." Something in his expression softened. "You're wise for 19. I'm practical. There's a difference." That night, following Rowan's advice, Alara drew a bath and added salts that smelled of eucalyptus and something sharper, medicinal. The hot water made her muscles scream at first, then slowly began to ease the tension. She soaked until the water went lukewarm, thinking about the day, the ride, the meadow, Rowan's laughter, the story about Sarah. She was starting to understand this place. More than that, she was starting to understand the man who'd built it as a fortress against loss. And that understanding was dangerous, because it made it harder to keep the careful distance she knew she should maintain. The days began to shorten after that, winter announcing its approach with frost that lingered past noon and wind that cut through even the thickest coat. Rowan worked longer hours, preparing for the hard months ahead, chopping wood, reinforcing the barn against heavy snow, checking and rechecking supplies. Alara fell into the rhythm of it, learning the hundreds of small tasks that kept a ranch running. She mastered the temperamental wood stove, figured out which chickens were likely to peck and which were docile, learned to read the sky for coming storms. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she and Rowan grew more comfortable with each other. The silences felt less awkward. The occasional conversations grew longer. Sometimes in the evening, they'd sit by the fire and Rowan would tell her stories about the mountain, where to find wild berries in summer, how to track deer, which caves to avoid because that's where the bears denned. It felt almost normal, almost like a life instead of a sentence. 3 weeks after their ride to the high pasture, Alara was in the chicken coop collecting eggs when she heard voices from the front of the house. Male voices, multiple, unfamiliar. She set down the basket and moved to the door, peering out carefully. 3 men on horseback had pulled up to the porch. Ranch hands, by the look of them, dusty clothes, worn gear, the kind of men who worked cattle for a living. Rowan stood on the porch, arms crossed, his body language all closed off hostility. "I'm telling you, we're not interested," he was saying. "Come on, Hale, be reasonable." The speaker was a big man with a beard going gray and a scar across one cheek. "We're offering good money for those cattle of yours, better than you'll get in town come spring." "Not selling?" "Why not? What are you going to do with them all winter? They'll just eat through your hay stores." "I said no." Rowan's voice had gone flat, dangerous. "Now get off my property." The scarred man's expression hardened. "You always were stubborn. Think you're better than everyone else, living up here like some kind of—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes landing on Ilara where she stood in the shadow of the coop. His gaze traveled over her slowly, assessing, and something cold slithered down her spine. "Well now," he said. "Didn't know you had company, Hale. Where'd you find this one?" "That's none of your business, Dutch." "Heard some interesting stories in town, though, about you buying Jacob Wren's debt, about his daughter coming to work it off." Dutch's smile was unpleasant. "Didn't realize work was what we were calling it these days." Rowan moved so fast, Ilara almost missed it, down the porch steps and across the yard, grabbing Dutch by the shirt and hauling him halfway out of his saddle. "Say that again," Rowan said quietly. "I dare you." Dutch's companions reached for their guns, but didn't draw. The tension ratcheted up to something explosive. "Easy," Dutch said, hands up in mock surrender. "Just making conversation." "You're making assumptions. Wrong ones." Rowan shoved him back into the saddle. "She's hired help, that's all. And what happens on my ranch is my business, not yours or anyone else's in town." "Sure," Dutch said, straightening his shirt. "Hired help." "That's what I said." He tipped his hat mockingly toward Ilara, and she felt her hands curl into fists. But before she could say anything, before she could make this worse, Rowan stepped between them, blocking her from view. "Leave," he said. "Now." Dutch gathered his reins, still smiling that ugly smile. "Suit yourself, Hale. But you can't hide up here forever. Word's already spreading about your little arrangement. People talk." They rode off, and Rowan stood there watching until they disappeared down the trail. Only then did he turn to look at Ilara. "You all right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." "It's what everyone thinks, isn't it?" Ilara said. "In town, I mean. That you bought me for—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Rowan's jaw tightened. "Probably. People think what they want to think. Can't control that." "Does it bother you, what they're saying?" He was quiet for a long moment. "It bothers me that it'll make things harder for you if you ever want to leave here. Once a reputation sticks—" He shook his head. "I should have thought about that before I made the offer. Should have realized how it would look." "You were trying to help." "Was I? Or was I just being selfish, wanting someone around so this place felt less empty?" He rubbed a hand over his face. "I don't know anymore." Ilara wanted to tell him it was okay, that she didn't regret coming here, that the truth mattered more than gossip, but the words stuck in her throat, too revealing. Instead, she said, "Those men, they wanted your cattle. Why?" "Because they work for the railroad company that's coming through next spring. They buy up land and livestock cheap, then sell it for profit. I'm not interested." "What if they don't take no for an answer? Then they'll have a problem." Rowan's expression was grim. "I didn't survive 8 years alone by being easy to push around." But as he walked back toward the barn, Ilara noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand drifted unconsciously toward where a gun would hang if he were wearing one. He was worried, and that worried her more than Dutch's implications or the town's gossip. That night, Rowan cleaned his rifle at the kitchen table, methodical and thorough. Ilara watched from where she was kneading bread dough, her hands moving on autopilot. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked. "Maybe. Men like Dutch don't give up easy when there's money involved." "What will you do if they do?" "Whatever I have to." He looked up from the rifle. "But I won't let them hurt you. That's a promise. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about you doing something stupid and getting yourself killed." His mouth quirked. "Didn't know you cared." "I don't want to be stuck on this mountain alone when winter hits," Ilara said, trying for lightness. "I'd starve in a week." "No, you wouldn't. You're tougher than that." She met his eyes across the table. So are you. Don't forget it. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or trust, or just the recognition that they were in this together now, whether they'd planned it or not. The next morning, Alara woke to find Rowan already gone and a note on the kitchen table. Riding fence line, back by dark, lock the doors. War R. She did as he asked, securing the house and going about her chores with one ear always listening for approaching horses. But the day passed quietly, and when Rowan returned just as the sun was setting, he looked tired but not troubled. Everything all right? She asked. Fence is secure, no sign of anyone nosing around. He hung up his coat. We should be fine. Should be? It's the best I can offer. They ate dinner and Rowan went to bed early, exhaustion finally catching up with him. Alara stayed up, finishing the mending by lamplight, too restless to sleep. The house creaked and settled around her, familiar sounds now. Outside, wind moved through the pines. An owl called somewhere in the darkness. She thought about what Dutch had said, about the stories spreading in town, about how she'd left one kind of trap, her father's debt, Thornby's intentions, only to walk into another. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? A different kind of cage, just with better bars. Except it didn't feel like a cage. Not anymore. And that was the problem. Because somewhere along the way, between the horseback ride and the shared dinners and the quiet conversations by firelight, she'd stopped thinking of this as temporary. Stopped counting the days until she could leave. She'd started thinking of it as home. And that terrified her more than anything Dutch or the railroad company could do. The following Sunday, Rowan surprised her. There's a community gathering in town today, he said over breakfast. Church social, potluck, that sort of thing. I thought, if you wanted, we could go. Alara stared at him. You want to go to a church social? No, but you might want to see your family. Your mother's probably worried. He was right. It had been nearly a month since she'd left, and she hadn't sent word. Her mother must be beside herself. Are you sure? Alara asked. After what Dutch said, showing up in town together, people are going to talk either way. Might as well let them see you're alive and well. His expression was carefully neutral. Unless you'd rather not go. No, I want to. I just thank you for thinking of it. They made the trip in the wagon, the same one they'd taken a month ago, though it felt like years. Alara wore her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and tried not to think about how she must look after weeks of ranch work. Rougher, probably. Less refined. The town came into view, and Alara's stomach knotted. She'd left as the subject of scandal and pity. She was coming back as... what? Confirmation of everything they'd whispered? The churchyard was full of people when they arrived, families gathered in clusters, children running between the groups. Conversation died as Rowan pulled the wagon up, heads turning to stare. Alara climbed down, very aware of every eye on her, of the whispers starting up like a swarm of wasps. I'll be at the general store, Rowan said quietly. When you're ready to leave, just find me. He was giving her space, she realized, letting her face this without him hovering, which would only make the gossip worse. Okay, she said. Thank you. She made her way through the crowd, looking for her family. People stepped aside to let her pass, but no one spoke to her directly. Their stares followed her like a physical weight. She found her mother near the food tables, arranging dishes with shaking hands. The moment she saw Alara, she dropped the bowl she was holding. Alara! They met in the middle, her mother's arms crushing her in a hug that made Alara's ribs ache. Her mother was crying, hard sobs that shook her whole body. I'm okay, Mama, Alara whispered. I'm okay. I've been so worried. I didn't know if... Her mother pulled back, hands framing Alara's face, searching for signs of what? Abuse? Despair? I'm fine, Alara said more firmly. Really, it's not what you think. Her mother's eyes said she wasn't convinced. Behind her, Alara saw her father and Thomas approaching, their faces a mix of relief and guilt. How is he treating you? Her father asked, voice low. If he's done anything... He hasn't. He's been... Alara searched for the right word. Fair, he keeps his word. I work. He provides room and board, that's all. That's all? Her mother's voice was sharp with disbelief. Alara, you can tell us. There's nothing to tell. Alara looked between them. He gave me my own room with a lock. He doesn't come near me unless it's about the work. He treats me like hired help. That's the truth. She could see them wanting to believe her, but not quite managing it. And why would they? Everything about the situation screamed impropriety, even if the reality was boringly innocent. Thomas hugged her hard, and she held him close, breathing in the familiar smell of boy sweat and mischief. "I miss you," he mumbled into her shoulder. "I miss you too, Bug." They talked for a while, Alara answering questions about the ranch, about the work, carefully editing out anything that might worry them more. Her mother kept touching her arm, her hair, her face, like she needed proof Alara was real and whole. But the whole time, Alara was aware of the people watching, listening, of the whispers that never quite stopped. Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, finally approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Alara, dear, so good to see you looking well." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson." "And how is Mr. Hale? We so rarely see him in town, such a solitary man." There was something in her tone that set Alara's teeth on edge. "He's well, busy with the ranch." "Of course, all that work must keep him very occupied." The pause before occupied was deliberate. "And you're helping with that work, I understand." "Yes, ma'am." "How charitable of him to take you in like that." Another weighted pause. "Though I suppose it benefits him as much as your family, having a young woman around the house." Alara's mother tensed beside her. Her father's face went red. "It's a business arrangement," Alara said evenly. "Nothing more." Mrs. Patterson's smile sharpened. "Of course, dear. I'm sure it is. Though you must understand how it looks to people. A man like that, alone for so long, suddenly taking in a young, unmarried woman. A woman whose family was about to lose everything," Alara cut in. "A woman who had a choice between working for Mr. Hale or being claimed by Marcus Thornby to settle her father's debt. Which option do you think was more charitable, Mrs. Patterson?" The older woman's face went stiff. "There's no need to be rude, Alara. I'm simply concerned for your reputation. My reputation was ruined the moment my father's debt became public knowledge. At least now I have food and shelter and work that doesn't involve—" She stopped herself, but the implication hung heavy. Everyone knew what Thornby would have expected from her. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said coldly, "I can see mountain life has coarsened you. What a shame." She swept away and Alara felt her hands shaking with anger and something darker. Shame, maybe, or just exhaustion at having to defend herself for surviving. "You shouldn't have spoken to her like that," her mother whispered. "She's influential in the church." "I don't care." Alara's voice came out harder than she intended. "I'm tired of people judging me for doing what I had to do, for making the best of a bad situation." "Alara—" "No, Mama. You wanted me to be safe. I'm safe. You wanted me to have food and shelter. I have both. If that's not good enough for Mrs. Patterson or anyone else in this town, that's their problem, not mine." Her father looked like he wanted to say something, but Alara was done. She'd come here to let them know she was all right, and she'd done that. Staying longer would just invite more judgment, more whispers. "I need to go," she said. "Tell Thomas I love him." She found Rowan at the general store, loading supplies into the wagon. He looked up when she approached, taking in her expression. "That bad?" "Worse." She climbed onto the wagon seat. "Can we leave?" He nodded, finished securing the supplies, and climbed up beside her. As they pulled away from town, Alara kept her eyes forward, refusing to look back at the people still watching, still whispering. They were halfway home before she spoke. "They think I'm your mistress." Rowan's hands tightened on the reins. "I know. Mrs. Patterson practically said so to my face, and my parents, they believe me, I think, but barely. Everyone else just assumes—" She stopped, throat tight with frustration and hurt. "I'm sorry," Rowan said. "I should have realized how bad it would get." "It's not your fault. It's just—" Alara wiped angry tears from her cheeks. "I hate that doing the smart thing, the survival thing, makes me the villain in their story. Like I should have chosen to starve with my dignity intact instead of living with my reputation ruined." "Your reputation isn't ruined." "Yes, it is. You know it is." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Does it matter? What they think?" "It shouldn't, but it does." Why? Alara thought about that. Why did it matter? These were people who'd watched her family struggle and done nothing, who'd come to see her humiliation at the church like it was entertainment. Why should she care what they thought? Because I have to live with it, she said finally. Even after the debt is paid, even if I leave someday, this will follow me. No decent man will marry me now. No respectable family will hire me. I'll always be the girl who... She couldn't finish. Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop. They were on the ridge overlooking the valley, the ranch visible below, the mountains rising behind it. "Look at me," he said. Alara turned to him, and he met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Those people down there, they're small, scared of anything different, anything that challenges how they think the world should work. They'd rather see you broken and proper than whole and free." He gestured toward the mountains. "Up here, none of that matters. What you are, what you choose, that's what matters, not their narrow-minded judgment. Easy for you to say. You chose to leave their world behind. And now you have too." Had she? Alara looked down at the ranch, at this place that had started as a prison and become something else entirely. At the man beside her, who'd given her space to breathe and room to choose and never once treated her like property. "I didn't choose this," she said quietly. "No, but you're choosing every day to stay, to make the best of it, to not let it break you." His voice gentled slightly. "That's braver than anything else they're doing down there." Alara felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but releasing. Like she'd been holding tension for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to let go. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not being what I expected. For being..." She hesitated, then committed. "For being kind. In your own gruff, terrible at conversation way." The corner of his mouth lifted. "You make me sound charming. Let's not go that far." He laughed, and they continued down toward home. But something had shifted between them on that ridge. An understanding, maybe, or an acknowledgement. They were both choosing this now, not because they had to, but because the alternative was lonelier than they wanted to admit. That night, after dinner, they sat by the fire as usual. But instead of working in silence, Rowan started telling her about Sarah. Not the tragic parts, but the good memories. How she'd insisted on planting a garden that first summer, even though half of it died in the mountain cold. How she'd sung while she cooked, off-key but enthusiastic. How she'd been convinced she could teach the chickens to come when called, and had spent weeks trying before admitting defeat. Alara listened, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts. And she realized this was what healing looked like. Being able to talk about loss without it consuming you. Being able to remember joy alongside grief. "She would have liked you," Rowan said eventually. "Sarah, I mean. She always said I needed someone who wouldn't put up with my nonsense." "I don't put up with it. Not even a little bit." Alara smiled. "Good. Someone has to keep you honest." They sat in comfortable silence after that, the fire crackling, snow just starting to fall outside. The first snow of winter, gentle and quiet. Alara thought about town, about the whispers and judgment waiting there. But up here, in this warm house with this complicated man who'd somehow become her ally, it all felt very far away. The world could think what it wanted. She knew the truth, and for tonight, that was enough. Winter came hard and fast after that first snowfall, burying the valley under 3 feet of white within a week. Alara had never experienced mountain winter before. The way it isolated you completely, cutting off the world until spring decided to return. The trail to town became impassable. The ranch became an island, and she and Rowan became the only 2 people in existence. The days fell into a rhythm dictated by survival. Keep the fires burning, keep the animals fed, keep the paths clear enough to move between buildings. Alara learned to read the sky for coming storms, to feel the temperature drop in her bones hours before the next blizzard hit. She learned which wood burned hottest, how to break ice on the water troughs without cracking them, how to move through waist-deep snow without exhausting herself. Rowan taught her without really teaching, just did the work and expected her to keep up. And she did, stubbornly matching him hour for hour, even when her muscles screamed and her fingers went numb inside her gloves. "You don't have to prove anything," he said one morning as they hauled hay to the barn through knee-deep powder. "I'm not proving anything. I'm doing my job." "Your job doesn't include frostbite. Alara looked down at her hands, red and aching even through the wool. I'm fine. You're freezing. Go inside, warm up. I'll finish this. We finish together or not at all. He stopped, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're as stubborn as that mare of yours. Smoke is practical, not stubborn. She's both, like someone else I know. Despite the cold, Alara felt warmth bloom in her chest. It wasn't quite a compliment, but from Rowan, it was close enough. They finished the work together, then stumbled back to the house, shedding snow-caked outer layers in the mudroom. Alara's fingers were so cold she couldn't manage the buttons on her coat. Rowan reached over without a word and undid them for her, his own hand steady despite the chill. Sit by the fire, he ordered. I'll make coffee. I can sit. She sat, too tired to argue, and watched him move around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing it alone for years. He'd become so familiar to her over these months. The way he moved, the set of his shoulders, the rare half-smile that meant he was amused but trying not to show it. When had that happened? When had the stranger who'd bought her family's debt become someone she knew down to the smallest detail? He brought her coffee, black and strong enough to strip paint, and sat in the chair across from her. They'd worn grooves into this routine, morning coffee, evening fire, the companionable silence between. Storm's coming, Rowan said, looking toward the window. Big one, if I'm reading it right. We might be stuck inside for a few days. How big? Big enough that going to the barn will be dangerous. We'll need to bring in extra wood now before it hits, and water. Everything we might need. They spent the afternoon preparing, working with the kind of focused intensity that came from knowing lives depended on it. By the time the wind started picking up, they'd stockpiled enough supplies to last a week if they had to. The storm hit just after dark, not snow, but ice. Freezing rain that turned everything into glass, pounding against the windows like thrown gravel. The wind howled around the house, finding every crack and gap, making the walls creak. Alara lay in bed that night listening to it, wondering if the roof would hold, if the barn would collapse, if the animals would survive. She'd never heard anything so violent, so relentless. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs, wrapped in a quilt. Rowan was already there, feeding the fire, his face drawn with worry. Can't sleep either? She asked, listening for sounds of trouble. What kind of trouble? Trees coming down, roof damage, animals in distress. He poked at the fire. Probably nothing, but I can't stop listening anyway. Alara settled into her usual chair, pulling the quilt tighter. Sarah, during your first winter together, was it like this? He glanced at her, surprised by the question. Worse, actually. We lost part of the barn roof that year, spent 3 days digging out afterward. His expression softened with memory. She thought it was an adventure, made a game of it, rationing supplies like we were explorers in the Arctic. You must have loved that about her, the way she found joy in things. I did. And I hated it sometimes too, if I'm honest. When I was worried and she was laughing, it felt like she didn't understand how serious things were. He was quiet for a moment, but she understood. She just chose not to let the fear win. That's brave. Or foolish, I haven't decided which. A particularly strong gust hit the house, making them both tense. But the walls held, the roof stayed intact. Just wind and ice and noise. Can I ask you something? Alara said. You really do ask a lot of questions. Character flaw. We've established this. His mouth quirked. Ask. Do you regret it? Taking me on. If you'd known how complicated it would get, the gossip, the judgment, all of it, would you still have done it? Rowan was quiet long enough that Alara thought he might not answer. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows across his face. No, he said finally. I wouldn't change it. Why not? Because this house was dying before you came here. Not physically. The structure was sound, but it was dying anyway. Empty rooms, silent meals, days that all bled together until I couldn't remember why I was bothering to survive instead of just existing. He looked at her directly. You changed that. And I'm selfish enough to be grateful for it, even if it cost you something. Alara's throat felt tight. It didn't cost me anything I wasn't going to lose anyway. Your reputation was never mine to begin with, just something other people decided I should value. She pulled the quilt closer. Up here, I get to decide what matters. And their opinion? It doesn't make the list. You've gotten harder, Rowan observed, since you came here. Is that bad? No, just different. The girl who showed up in September wouldn't have talked back to Mrs. Patterson. The girl who showed up in September was terrified and trying not to show it. And now? Alara thought about that. What was she now? Not terrified exactly. Not completely at ease either. Something in between. Alert, maybe. Aware of how quickly things could change, how fragile safety really was. Now I'm just tired of pretending, she said. Tired of being small and polite and grateful for scraps. If that makes me hard, so be it. Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition. Good, he said. The world's hard enough without handicapping yourself with politeness. They stayed up most of the night, keeping the fire fed, listening to the storm rage outside. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Alara dozed off in her chair, and when she woke an hour later, there was a blanket draped over her that hadn't been there before. Rowan was asleep in his own chair, head tilted back, face relaxed in a way she rarely saw. Without the tension he usually carried, he looked younger, less weathered by loss. Alara watched him for a moment, this man who'd accidentally become her anchor. Then she added wood to the fire and settled back in to wait for dawn. The storm lasted 3 days. By the second day, they'd run through all the small talk and were left with the kind of conversation that only happened when you had nothing but time and nowhere to escape to. Tell me about before, Alara said as they played cards at the kitchen table, a game Rowan had taught her to pass the hours. Before Sarah, before the ranch. Who were you? Nobody interesting. I'll be the judge of that. He sighed, studying his cards like they might save him from answering. I worked cattle for other people. Drifted from ranch to ranch, doing whatever work needed doing. No plans, no ambition beyond the next meal and a place to sleep. What changed? Met Sarah. She was a rancher's daughter, way above my station. I should have known better than to look at her twice. He discarded, drew a new card. But she saw something in me I didn't see in myself. Convinced me I could be more than a hired hand. So I saved everything I earned for 2 years, bought this land, built this house, married her the day the roof went on. That's romantic. That's terrifying is what it is. I was 27 years old, had never owned anything in my life, suddenly responsible for a wife and a homestead and a future. He laid down his cards, a winning hand. Scared me half to death. Alara gathered the cards, shuffling for the next round. But you did it anyway. Didn't have a choice. She believed in me, couldn't let her down. And after she died? His hands stilled. After she died, I didn't know who I was anymore. Everything I'd built for her. For us. When that ended, he stopped, swallowed hard. I thought about leaving, selling the ranch, going back to drifting. Would have been easier. Why didn't you? Because this was hers, ours. Leaving would have been like saying it didn't matter, that she didn't matter. So I stayed. Kept it running out of spite, maybe, or loyalty. I still don't know which. Alara dealt the new hand, thinking about what it meant to build a life around someone else's dream. What happened when that person was gone and you were left holding pieces that didn't fit together anymore? You stayed because it mattered to you too, she said quietly. Not just her, you. Maybe. Definitely. You don't spend 8 years maintaining a place out of spite. You do it because somewhere along the way, it became yours. He picked up his cards, but she could see she'd hit something true. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just observant. She studied her own hand. And I understand stubbornness. It's a family trait. They played in silence for a while. Outside, the storm was finally starting to ease, the ice letting up, though the wind still howled. Your turn for questions, Alara said. Ask me something. Like what? Anything. We've been stuck in this house for 3 days. Might as well get to know each other. Rowan thought about it. All right, what would you have done if I hadn't bought the debt? If it had gone to Thornby? Alara's hands tightened on her cards. She'd thought about this, late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Played out the alternative in her mind until she knew every terrible detail. Run, probably. Take Thomas and run as far as we could get before the money ran out. She met his eyes. It would have destroyed my parents. Would have meant starting over with nothing in a place where nobody knew us. But it would have been better than... She couldn't finish. Then what Thornby wanted. Yes. You would have done it, though. Run. Without hesitation, he nodded slowly. That's what I thought. When I saw you at the church, ready to fight even though you knew you'd lose. You had that look, like you'd rather die free than live in a cage. Is that why you made the offer? Because you thought I'd run? Partly. Also because I knew what Thornby would do to you, and I... He stopped himself. You what? I couldn't let it happen. Not if I could prevent it. Elara set down her cards. Why? You didn't know me. Didn't owe me anything. Rowan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Because Sarah would have done the same thing. If she'd seen someone in trouble, someone who reminded her of herself when she was young and fighting for something better, she would have helped. And I thought, maybe if I did this one thing, this one decent thing, it would make up for not being able to save her. The honesty of it hit Elara like a fist to the chest. He hadn't saved her for her sake. He'd done it for his dead wife, trying to balance cosmic scales that would never even out. That's not how it works, she said gently. You know that, right? Saving me doesn't bring her back. I know, but it helps. A little. Makes the guilt less sharp. You shouldn't feel guilty. You couldn't have known. I chose to live out of here, miles from help. I chose that, knowing it was dangerous for her. And when she needed a doctor, needed help, I couldn't... His voice cracked. I couldn't get her there fast enough. Held her while she died and couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Elara moved without thinking, crossing to his chair and kneeling beside it, taking his hands in hers. They were shaking. It wasn't your fault, she said firmly. Sometimes terrible things just happen. No reason, no one to blame, just bad luck and worse timing. You sound very sure. I am. Because I've spent months watching you punish yourself for being human, for making choices that seemed right at the time, for not being able to predict the future or prevent the unpredictable. She squeezed his hands. And I'm tired of watching you carry that weight alone. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression cracked open. When did you stop being afraid of me? I was never afraid of you. I was afraid of what you might want from me. But you never wanted anything except honest work and someone to share the silence with. Is that enough? For you, I mean. It's more than I expected, more than I thought I'd get. They stayed like that for a moment, hands clasped, something unspoken but understood passing between them. Then Rowan gently pulled away, clearing his throat. Storm's breaking, he said, nodding toward the window where weak sunlight was starting to filter through. We should check on the animals. Right. Yes. They bundled up and ventured outside for the first time in 3 days. The world had been transformed, everything coated in ice, glittering like diamonds in the thin sunlight, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. The barn had held, though ice hung from the eaves in dangerous spikes. The animals were restless but alive, hungry and impatient for attention. They spent the next several hours breaking ice, distributing feed, checking for injuries. It was exhausting work, made harder by the ice that turned every step into a potential fall. But there was satisfaction in it too, in seeing the ranch had survived, that their preparation had been enough. As they finished up, Elara noticed Rowan favoring his right leg, limping slightly. You're hurt, she said. Just tweaked it breaking ice. It's fine. Let me see. Elara was, let me see or I'll tackle you and look anyway. He stared at her. You wouldn't. Try me. A smile tugged at his mouth. You've gotten bossy. I've gotten practical. There's a difference. Now sit down and let me check your leg before you make it worse. Grumbling, he sat on a hay bale and rolled up his pant leg. His ankle was already swelling, a dark bruise spreading across the joint. That's not fine, Elara said. That's sprained at minimum. I've had worse. I'm sure you have. Doesn't mean you should walk on it. She stood, hands on hips. Back to the house. Now. You're staying off it for the rest of the day. We still have work, which I can handle. You've been teaching me for months. Time to see if it's stuck. He looked like he wanted to argue, but pain won out over stubbornness. He let her help him back to the house, leaning on her more than he probably wanted to admit. Inside, she settled him in his chair by the fire, propped his foot up, and wrapped the ankle with strips of cloth soaked in cold water to keep the swelling down. You're enjoying this, he observed. Enjoying what? Ordering me around, getting revenge for all the times I've been difficult. Elara smiled. Maybe a little. How does it feel being the one who has to sit still and accept help? Terrible. Good. Now you know how I felt those first few weeks. She made dinner while he sat there fuming about his forced inactivity, and they ate by the fire as darkness fell. The ice storm had passed, leaving behind a world made of glass. Thank you, Rowan said eventually. For what? For not letting me be stupid about the ankle, for taking care of things while I couldn't. That's what partners do. The word hung in the air between them. Partners. Not employer and employee, not captor and captive. Partners. Is that what we are? Rowan asked quietly. Elara thought about the last 4 months, about all the ways this arrangement had evolved from transaction to something else entirely, something that didn't have a neat label. I think so, she said. If you want to be. I do. He met her eyes. I really do. Something settled in Elara's chest. Not quite happiness, but close. Contentment, maybe. Or just the relief of naming something that had been true for weeks but unacknowledged. That night, as she lay in bed, Elara thought about partnerships and trust and the slow way strangers became family if you gave them enough time and space to grow into it. Outside, the ice-covered world glittered under starlight. And for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Elara fell asleep smiling. The ankle took 2 weeks to heal properly, during which Rowan was a terrible patient. He tried to work anyway, limping through chores until Elara threatened to tie him to his chair. They compromised. He could do seated tasks like mending tack and organizing supplies, while she handled everything that required walking. It forced a shift in their dynamic. Rowan had to trust her to manage things alone, and Elara had to step into a leadership role she hadn't quite owned before. She made decisions about when to move the cattle to different pasture, how much grain to ration, which repairs were urgent and which could wait. And she was good at it, better than she'd expected. You're a natural, Rowan said one evening as she came in from checking fence lines, cheeks red from cold. At what? This. The ranch work. Thinking 3 steps ahead, planning for contingencies. You've got the instinct for it. Elara hung up her coat, pleased despite herself. I had a good teacher. I didn't teach you that. You either have it or you don't. Sarah had it too, could look at a situation and know immediately what needed doing, what could wait, what was urgent. It was the first time he'd compared her to Sarah in a positive way, and Elara wasn't sure how to feel about it. Honored, maybe. Or slightly uncomfortable, like she was stepping into shoes that weren't meant for her. I'm not her, she said carefully. I know, you're different, but the core thing, the ability to see what needs doing and just do it without overthinking, that's the same. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a necessary thing. Can't run a place like this without it. By the time his ankle was fully healed, winter had settled into its deepest, coldest phase. The days were short, the nights endless. They burned through wood at an alarming rate, rationed candles and lamp oil, measured time by storms instead of calendar dates. And somehow, it wasn't miserable. They fell into routines that felt almost domestic. Elara cooked, Rowan cleaned. They traded off morning chores depending on who was less tired. Evenings were spent by the fire, talking or reading or just sitting in comfortable silence. Sometimes Rowan would tell stories about his drifting days, about the characters he'd met and places he'd seen. Sometimes Elara would read aloud from her poetry book, the only luxury she'd brought from home. The words sounded different here, in this house made warm against the cold, less like empty promises and more like possibilities. One night in late January, after a particularly brutal day of digging out from another storm, they sat by the fire sharing a bottle of whiskey Rowan had been saving, not getting drunk exactly, but letting the warmth of it ease muscles sore from hard labor. Can I tell you something? Elara said, the whiskey making her braver than usual. You're going to anyway. She smiled. I don't hate this. Being here, I mean. I thought I would. Thought I'd count every day until I could leave, but I don't. Why not? Because it's honest. The work is hard, but it's real. I can see what I've accomplished at the end of the day. And you... She hesitated. I what? You don't lie. You don't pretend. You're exactly who you are, all the time. It's refreshing after a lifetime of people saying one thing and meaning another. Rowan took a drink, considering that. I spent too many years alone to remember how to be anything other than myself. Don't know if that's a virtue or just stubbornness. Both, probably. You're honest too, more than you were when you arrived. Had to be. Can't survive up here on polite lies and careful words. No, he agreed. You can't. They sat in silence for a while, passing the bottle back and forth. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, lonely, wild, free. What happens when spring comes? Elara asked. When the debt is worked off? It was a question she'd been avoiding for months. Because the truth was, at the rate she was going, room and board deducted from her wages, it would take years to pay off $3,000. Maybe a decade. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. You should. We both should. Why? What good does it do to plan for something that might not happen? Because I need to know if I'm building something or just treading water. He looked at her, firelight catching in his eyes. What do you want it to be? Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. This felt dangerous, like stepping onto ice that might not hold. But she'd learned courage from this mountain, from this man who'd survived impossible loss. I want to matter, she said, not just as labor or as someone working off a debt. I want what I do here to count for something real. It does count. He stopped, searching for words. You've made this place feel alive again. That matters more than you know. But when spring comes, when the trail clears, what then? Do I go back to town? Try to rebuild something there? Or do I stay here and keep... She gestured vaguely at the house, the life they'd built. What do you want? Rowan asked again, more insistent this time. Elara wanted to say she didn't know. It would have been easier, safer. But the whiskey and the firelight and the months of hard-won trust made her reckless. I want to stay, she said, but not as hired help, not as someone working off debt until I'm too old to leave. Then how? As a partner, real partner, with a stake in this place. Someone who's building something, not just surviving. She watched his face, trying to read his reaction. But Rowan's expression was unreadable, shadows and firelight making it impossible to tell what he was thinking. That's asking for a lot, he said finally. I know, but I've earned it. 4 months of work, never complaining, learning everything you'd teach me. I'm not the girl who showed up in September. I'm someone who can run this ranch as well as you can. That's not... He stopped, rubbed a hand over his face. You're right. You have earned it. But what you're asking, making you a real partner, that's more complicated than just acknowledging your work. Why? Because partnerships require trust, commitment, the kind where you can't just walk away when things get hard. Have I walked away once? Even when it was miserable, even when the town judged me, even when I had every reason to run, did I? No, he admitted. You didn't. Then trust me. Let me prove I can be more than temporary help. Rowan stood, pacing to the window, looking out at the snow-covered darkness. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough. If I do this, if I make you a real partner, it changes everything. The town will have more to say. Your reputation will be already ruined. We've established this. It'll be worse. Right now they think you're working for me. If I make you a partner, give you ownership stake, they'll assume he didn't finish, that we're together, that this is more than business. Yes. Elara stood too, moving to stand beside him at the window. Their reflections looked back at them from the dark glass. Two people who'd stumbled into each other's lives and somehow made it work. Let them assume, she said. I'm done living my life based on what other people think. Even if it costs you any chance of a normal future, marriage, family, all of that? What's normal about any of this? Elara gestured at the house, the mountain, the life they'd built. I gave up normal the day I left town. Might as well commit to abnormal and make it count. Rowan turned to look at her, something fierce and vulnerable in his expression. You're sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to this place, to me, in a way that... I'm already tied to it, Elara interrupted. Already committed in every way except legally. All I'm asking is that you make it official. Acknowledge what's already true. He studied her face like he was trying to memorize it. looking for doubt or hesitation. But Alara met his gaze steadily, sure of this in a way she hadn't been sure of anything in months. "All right," Rowan said finally. "When spring comes, we'll go to town. Make it legal. You'll own half of everything, the land, the house, the livestock. Full partners." Relief and something deeper flooded through Alara. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You earned it." He reached out, hesitated, then squeezed her shoulder briefly. "You're braver than I am. Braver than Sarah was, even. She had hope. You just have stubbornness and spite." Alara laughed. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Don't get used to it." But his eyes were warm, and when they sat back down by the fire, something between them had shifted. They weren't employer and employee anymore, weren't even just friends. They were partners in truth, building something together that neither could manage alone. Outside, the winter howled on. Inside, they sat together in the warmth and planned for spring. Spring didn't arrive gently. It came in fits and starts. A warm day followed by 3 freezing ones, melting snow that refroze into treacherous ice, mud that swallowed boots whole. March was the worst of it, caught between seasons, belonging to neither. But by mid-April, the valley had finally begun to wake. Green pushed through brown, the creek ran high with snowmelt, and birds returned with their relentless noise. The trail to town cleared enough to be passable, though still muddy and difficult. Rowan waited another week to be sure, then announced at breakfast one morning, "We should go to town tomorrow. Get it done." Alara's stomach twisted. She'd known this was coming, had asked for it even. But now that it was real, fear crept in around the edges of her certainty. "Tomorrow," she repeated, "unless you've changed your mind." "No, I haven't." She forced steadiness into her voice. "Tomorrow's fine." That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, playing out every possible version of how it might go. The town had been vicious enough when they'd visited in the fall. Now, after months of winter isolation, with Rowan announcing he was making her a legal partner, they'd tear her apart. Let them, she thought fiercely. Let them say whatever they wanted. She'd survived worse than small-minded gossip. But as dawn broke and the reality of it settled over her, Alara's hand shook as she dressed. She chose her best outfit, the dress she'd worn that first day, mended and cleaned but still showing its age. It would have to do. Rowan was already outside hitching the wagon when she came down. He glanced at her, taking in her pale face, and his expression softened slightly. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I can file the papers myself. You can wait here." "No." Alara climbed onto the wagon seat. "We do this together or not at all?" Still stubborn, still practical. The ride to town felt both too long and too short. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? They both knew what waited. The questions, the accusations, the judgment that would fall on Alara like stones. The town came into view as the sun climbed higher, and Alara's chest tightened. Nothing had changed. Same buildings, same dusty streets, same people going about their lives. But she felt different, like she'd left as one person and was returning as someone else entirely. Rowan pulled the wagon up outside the land office, a small building near the center of town. A few people on the street stopped to stare. Whispers started immediately. "Ready?" Rowan asked. "No, but let's go anyway." The land office clerk was a nervous man named Pemberton, who'd handled Rowan's original property deed 8 years ago. His eyebrows shot up when they explained what they wanted. "A partnership deed," he repeated slowly, "dividing your property equally between yourself and Miss Wren." "That's right," Rowan said. Pemberton's eyes flicked to Alara, then away. "This is highly irregular. I'll need to see the original debt papers, verify that, "The debt has nothing to do with this," Rowan interrupted. "This is a separate arrangement, a business partnership." "I see." Pemberton didn't look like he saw it all. "And Miss Wren is contributing capital to justify an equal share?" "She's contributing 4 months of labor that kept the ranch running through winter. That's worth more than capital." "Mr. Hale, I'm not questioning the arrangement itself, but for legal purposes, it's my property and I can divide it however I want. Now, are you going to draw up the papers or do I need to ride to the county seat?" Pemberton wilted under Rowan's glare. No need for that. I can prepare the documents. It'll take a few hours. You can wait or come back." "We'll wait," Rowan said firmly. They left the office and stepped back into the street. More people were staring now, word spreading like fire through dry grass. Alara could feel their eyes tracking her every movement. Coffee? Rowan suggested, nodding toward the small restaurant across the street. Might as well give them something to really talk about. The restaurant fell silent when they entered. Every conversation stopped mid-word, every fork paused halfway to mouths. The owner, Mrs. Chen, recovered first. "Mr. Hale, Miss Wren, please, sit anywhere." They took a table near the window. Mrs. Chen brought coffee without being asked, her face carefully neutral, but her eyes curious. "Thank you," Alara said quietly. The woman nodded and retreated, but Alara could feel her watching from behind the counter. "This is awful," Alara muttered. "It'll get worse before it gets better." "That's supposed to be comforting?" "It's supposed to be honest." Rowan took a drink of coffee. "But it won't last. Give it a few weeks, they'll find something else to talk about." Before Alara could respond, the door opened and Marcus Thornby walked in. Of course he would show up now. Thornby's eyes found them immediately, and his smile was sharp as broken glass. He walked over to their table, uninvited, and pulled out a chair. "Hale, Miss Wren, how delightful to see you both." He sat down, making himself comfortable. "I heard you were in town, doing some business at the land office?" "That's none of your concern," Rowan said flatly. "Oh, but it is. Everything that happens in this town is my concern." Thornby's gaze slid to Alara. "Especially when it involves debts that were owed to me." "The debt was paid," Alara said, keeping her voice steady. "You have no claim on my family anymore." "True. But I do wonder about the new arrangement you've made." He leaned back, utterly at ease. "Partnership papers, I hear, making the girl an equal owner. Very generous of you, Hale, though I can't help but wonder what she's giving you in return." The implication was clear, ugly, deliberate. Rowan's hand moved to the knife at his belt. "Careful, Thornby. I'm simply observing. She came here as hired help to work off a debt. Now suddenly she's a partner with ownership stake. One has to wonder about the nature of that transaction." "You're wondering wrong," Alara said, surprising herself with how calm she sounded. "The partnership is based on work, nothing more. 4 months of labor managing a ranch through winter, that's the transaction." "Is it?" Thornby's smile widened. "Then you won't mind if I share my observations with the community. Help them understand the situation." "Share whatever you want," Alara shot back. "Your opinion stopped mattering to me the day I left this town." Something dangerous flickered in Thornby's eyes. Brave words from a girl with no family, no prospects, and a reputation already in tatters. "You might want to remember that I still have influence here. Your parents, your brother, they still live in my town, under my rules." Alara felt ice slide down her spine. He was threatening them. Not directly, but the implication was clear. Rowan stood so fast his chair scraped across the floor. "Get out!" "I'm simply having a conversation." "You're threatening her family. That ends now." Rowan's voice was deadly quiet. "Touch them. Say one word to make their lives harder, and I'll make you regret it." "That's not a threat, Thornby. It's a promise." For a moment, tension hung thick enough to choke on. The restaurant had gone completely silent, everyone watching, waiting to see if this would turn violent. Then Thornby stood, straightening his vest with deliberate calm. "No need for dramatics, Hale. I was merely expressing concern for Miss Wren's well-being, but I can see you have that well in hand." The way he said it made Alara's skin crawl. He tipped his hat mockingly and left, and the restaurant slowly came back to life around them. Rowan sat back down, his jaw tight with anger. "I'm sorry, I should have—" "Don't," Alara said. "You did what needed doing." But her hands were shaking around her coffee cup, and she couldn't quite get them to stop. They finished their coffee in tense silence, then walked back toward the land office. On the way, they passed the church, and Alara's mother was there, sweeping the steps. She looked up, saw Alara, and froze. "Mama?" Alara said softly. Her mother set down the broom and hurried over, pulling Alara into a fierce hug. "I didn't know you were in town. Are you all right? Is everything—" "I'm fine, Mama. Really." Her mother pulled back, searching Alara's face. Then her gaze shifted to Rowan, standing a respectful distance away, and something complicated passed over her features. "Mr. Hale." "Mrs. Wren." An awkward silence stretched between them. Then Alara's mother said, "I want to thank you for—" She struggled with the words. for keeping her safe, for treating her well. Rowan looked uncomfortable. She earned it. Your daughter's stronger than you probably know. I do know. Her mother's voice was fierce. But thank you anyway. Elara's father appeared in the church doorway, and the tension ratcheted up immediately. He came down the steps slowly, his face unreadable. Elara, Rowan. Jacob, Rowan said evenly. They stood there, 4 people bound by debt and circumstance and decisions made in desperation. Finally, Elara's father spoke. I heard what you're doing. The partnership deed. Word travels fast, Rowan observed. It does. And I need to know, is this what she wants, or is this something you're... He couldn't finish, but the implication was clear. It's what I want, Papa, Elara said before Rowan could respond. I asked for it. I earned it, and I'm not going to apologize for choosing to build something instead of just surviving. Her father's expression crumbled. I never wanted this for you. Any of it. I know, but it happened anyway. And I've made peace with it. You should too. How can I? My daughter working like a servant, living with a man she barely knows. I know him better than I knew anyone in this town, Elara interrupted. He's given me respect, space, trust, things I never had here. So if you're asking if I'm happy, the answer is no. But I'm building towards something that might become happiness someday. And that's more than I had before. Her mother was crying silently, tears running down her face. Her father looked like he'd aged another decade. We should go, Rowan said quietly. Papers should be ready by now. Elara hugged her mother one more time, nodded to her father, and walked away. It hurt, leaving them there, seeing their pain and knowing she'd caused it by choosing herself over their comfort. But she didn't look back. The papers were ready, thick with legal language that Pemberton explained in detail, division of property, shared ownership, rights and responsibilities. Elara signed her name at the bottom, the ink wet and dark against the pale paper. Just like that, she owned half a mountain ranch. Congratulations, Pemberton said, though he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The deed will be filed with the county by week's end. Good, Rowan said. He picked up the papers, folded them carefully, and turned to Elara. Ready to go home? Home. The word settled warm in her chest. Yes. They left the office and found half the town gathered in the street, pretending to go about their business, but really just watching. Waiting for drama, for scandal, for something to confirm their worst assumptions. Mrs. Patterson stood at the front of the crowd, arms crossed, face pinched with disapproval. Mr. Hale, a word. Not interested, Rowan said, heading for the wagon. The community has concerns about this arrangement, about the message it sends to our young people. Then the community can mind its own business. Rowan helped Elara onto the wagon seat. What happens on my ranch is between me and my partner. Nobody else. Your partner, Mrs. Patterson said, loading the word with disgust. Is that what we're calling it now? Elara felt something snap inside her. She'd been silent, polite, careful, swallowing every insult, every insinuation, every judgment. But she was done being small to make other people comfortable. Yes, she said clearly. That's exactly what we're calling it. I'm his partner in every legal sense. I own half that ranch, half the livestock, half everything. And I earned it through work, through learning, through proving I could handle whatever winter threw at me. You earned it by, Mrs. Patterson started. By surviving, Elara cut her off. By making the best choice I could with the options I had. And if you want to judge me for that, fine. Judge away. But I'm done pretending your opinion matters to me. A murmur ran through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson's face went red. You insolent girl, after everything we've tried to do for your family. You did nothing, Elara said, her voice rising. When my father's debt came due, when Thornby was circling, when I was about to be sold to the highest bidder, where were you? Where was this community then? Silence. That's what I thought. You watched, you whispered, you judged, but you didn't help. So don't stand there now and lecture me about propriety or morality or what message I'm sending. You don't get to have opinions about choices you weren't brave enough to make. She turned to Rowan. Let's go. He snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. The crowd parted, and they drove through, leaving shocked silence in their wake. They were almost out of town when someone shouted, "Whore!" Alara flinched, but Rowan's hand found hers, squeezed once, firm and warm. "Don't," he said quietly. "They're not worth it." But Alara was already standing in the wagon, turning to face whoever had shouted. A young man, couldn't have been more than 20, stood near the general store, looking smug. "Say it again," Alara called back. "To my face this time, instead of hiding in a crowd." The young man's smugness faltered. "No? Nothing else to say?" Alara's voice carried across the street. "That's what I thought. Easy to throw insults when you think there won't be consequences, but there are always consequences." She sat back down, heart pounding, hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. Rowan was staring at her. "That was stupid." I was going to say brave, but stupid works too. Despite everything, Alara laughed. "I'm done being quiet, done letting them make me feel ashamed for surviving." "Good, because that town doesn't deserve your silence." They rode out of town in tense quiet, but as the valley opened up before them and the ranch came into view, something in Alara's chest finally loosened. "I can't go back there," she said. "Not for a long time." "You don't have to. We've got everything we need here. My family can visit when they're ready, on your terms, not the town's." It was the right answer, but it still hurt. Alara had effectively severed herself from the only life she'd ever known. For better or worse, the ranch was her world now. When they reached the house, Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop, but didn't move to get down. Instead, he turned to her. "What you did back there, standing up to them, that took courage. Or stupidity. Still haven't decided which. Both, probably. But it was yours. Your choice. Your voice. Your fight." He paused. "Sarah would have done the same thing. She never could stand bullies. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you, probably would have tried to teach you to garden, which would have ended in disaster since nothing grows up here anyway." Alara smiled despite herself. "What else would she have done?" "Made you laugh." Sarah had this way of finding humor in everything, even when things were terrible. Used to drive me crazy. I'd be worried about something and she'd just... He stopped, something painful crossing his face. "It's okay to miss her," Alara said gently. "I'm not trying to replace her." "I know. But sometimes I feel guilty, being," he struggled with the words, "being happy, or close to it. Like I'm betraying her memory by not staying miserable forever." "That's not how it works. She wouldn't want you to be miserable." "No, she'd want me to be alive, not just surviving, to let people in instead of keeping everyone at arm's length." He looked at Alara directly. "You've given me that, a reason to be present instead of just going through motions." Alara's throat felt tight. "You've given me something too, a place where I get to decide who I am instead of letting other people define me." They sat there for a moment, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, the mountains rising around them like walls keeping the rest of the world at bay. "Partners?" Rowan said finally, offering his hand. "Partners," Alara agreed, shaking it. The handshake lingered longer than necessary, and when they finally let go, something had shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, and not romance. Something harder to name. Recognition, maybe, or just the acknowledgement that they'd chosen each other, deliberately and with full knowledge of what it would cost. That night, Alara stood at her bedroom window looking out at the valley. The partnership papers sat on her dresser, proof that she owned half of everything she could see. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like a beginning. Somewhere in the house below, she heard Rowan moving around, banking the fire for the night. The familiar sounds of home. Alara thought about Mrs. Patterson's face, about the whispered word thrown at her back, about her mother's tears and her father's guilt. She thought about Thornby's threats and the town's judgment and the future she'd burned to the ground by refusing to be small and grateful and silent. And she thought about the ranch, this beautiful, harsh, isolated place that had become hers not through birth or marriage, but through work and choice and the sheer stubborn refusal to give up. Tomorrow there would be more work. Fences to mend, cattle to tend, supplies to inventory, the endless tasks of keeping a ranch alive. But tonight, Alara allowed herself a moment of something close to pride. She'd fought for this, earned it, claimed it, and nothing, not gossip, not judgment, not the whole narrow-minded town, could take that away from her. Outside, the wolves began their nightly chorus, and Alara smiled in the darkness. She was one of them now, wild, defiant, free, and she'd never been more herself in her life. The weeks after the town visit passed in a blur of work and deliberate isolation. Spring erupted across the valley with almost violent intensity, everything growing, blooming, demanding attention. Alara and Rowan fell into the rhythm of it, up before dawn, working until dark, too exhausted most nights for anything beyond a simple meal and sleep. But something had changed between them since that day in town. The partnership papers had made official what was already true, but speaking it aloud, claiming it publicly, had shifted the dynamic in ways neither of them quite knew how to navigate. They were more careful with each other now, more aware. Rowan would catch himself watching her work, then look away quickly when she noticed. Alara found herself listening for his footsteps, tracking his location in the house, even when she was focused on other tasks. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was new, this hyper-awareness of another person's presence. 3 weeks after their trip to town, a rider appeared on the trail, the first visitor they'd had since winter. Alara spotted him from where she was working in the garden plot she'd started behind the house, trying to coax vegetables from soil that really didn't want to cooperate. She called out to Rowan, who emerged from the barn, hand already moving toward the rifle he kept near the door. But as the rider got closer, Rowan's posture relaxed slightly. "It's the land agent from the county seat, probably following up on the partnership filing." The man who dismounted was elderly, with kind eyes and official-looking papers in his saddlebag. "Mr. Hale, Miss Wren, name's Porter. I handle property transfers for the county." They invited him inside, offered coffee, waited while he reviewed documents with the meticulous care of someone who'd been doing this work for 40 years. "Everything appears to be in order," Porter said finally. "The partnership is legally binding as of 2 weeks ago. You're both listed as equal owners." He looked between them. "I have to say this is unusual. Not illegal, just uncommon. Partnership arrangements like this typically involve marriage or blood relation." "We're aware," Rowan said flatly. "Just making sure you understand the implications. If one of you were to die, the other inherits automatically. If you wanted to dissolve the partnership, you'd need mutual agreement or a court order. It's binding in a way that employment never is." "We understand," Alara said. "That's what we want." Porter nodded, pulled out one more document. "There's also the matter of the original debt. $3,000 owed by Jacob Wren, purchased by you, Mr. Hale, with Miss Wren as collateral labor." Alara's stomach tightened. She'd almost forgotten about that part, the legal reality beneath the partnership arrangement. "What about it?" Rowan asked. "Well, now that Miss Wren is your legal partner, the debt structure becomes complicated. She can't simultaneously owe you labor and own half your assets. The law doesn't work that way." Rowan and Alara exchanged glances. "So what happens to the debt?" she asked. Porter pulled out another paper. "I took the liberty of drafting a debt forgiveness document. If you both sign it, the original obligation is voided. Miss Wren's labor over the past 6 months is considered payment in full, regardless of the actual value calculation." Alara felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "You're saying the debt would be gone? Completely?" "That's correct. Your family would owe nothing. You'd owe nothing." Porter looked at Rowan. "Of course, Mr. Hale would be out the $3,000 he paid to Thornby, but given the partnership arrangement, I assume that's acceptable." Rowan didn't hesitate. "Where do I sign?" "Wait," Alara said. "You paid $3,000. That's not nothing. You can't just—" "I can, and I am." Rowan met her eyes. "You've more than earned it, and having that debt hanging over everything, it needs to end. But my family will be free of it too. Isn't that what you wanted? For them to be safe?" It was what she'd wanted, what she'd sacrificed everything for, and now Rowan was offering it freely, no strings attached. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you do this?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because you're not indebted labor anymore. You're my partner, and partners don't owe each other. They build together. Can't do that if one of us is carrying a $3,000 weight around our neck." Porter cleared his throat diplomatically. "I'll just step outside while you discuss this." When he was gone, Alara turned to Rowan fully. "This is too much. You've already given me half the ranch, which you earned, every acre of it. But the money is already spent, been spent for months. Forgiving the debt doesn't cost me anything except pride, and I've got enough of that to spare. Alara felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. You're infuriating. I've been told. I'm serious. You can't just keep being decent when I'm trying to argue with you. A smile tugged at his mouth. I could be difficult about it if you prefer. Make you grovel, demand payment plans, that sort of thing. Don't you dare joke about this. Then don't make it harder than it needs to be. Sign the paper, free yourself and your family, and let's move on. She wanted to argue more, to insist he keep some claim on her as insurance or protection. But the truth was, she didn't want to be bound by debt anymore. Didn't want that hanging over every decision, every choice. Okay, she said finally. Let's sign it. Porter came back in, and they signed. Rowan first, then Alara, her hand steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing. Just like that, 6 months of obligation dissolved into nothing. After Porter left, Alara stood in the kitchen feeling unmoored. Free, yes, but also untethered in a way that was almost frightening. You all right? Rowan asked. I don't know. I thought I'd feel relieved, but mostly I just feel... She struggled for the word. Unfinished. Like there should be more to it. There's not. You're free. We're partners. That's the whole story. It doesn't feel like enough. What would be enough? Alara didn't have an answer for that. 2 days later, Dutch and his companions returned. Alara was in the barn when she heard horses approaching, multiple riders, moving fast. She stepped out into the yard and felt her stomach drop. 6 men this time, all armed, all wearing expressions that said they weren't here for conversation. Rowan emerged from the house, rifle already in hand. He positioned himself between Alara and the riders. Thought I told you to stay off my property, Dutch, he said evenly. Dutch reined in his horse, hands visible but close to his gun. We're not here to cause trouble, Hale. Just want to make you an offer. Not interested. You haven't heard it yet. Don't need to. The answer's no. Dutch's jaw tightened. The railroad's coming through whether you like it or not. They're buying up land all through this valley. You're the last holdout, and you're making things difficult. Good. I like being difficult. $5,000, Hale. For the whole property. Land, livestock, everything. That's more than fair. It's not enough. Not even close. It's triple what this place is worth, and you know it. Then go find property that's worth what you're offering. Mine's not for sale. One of the other riders shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his gun. Alara's breath caught. You're being unreasonable, Dutch said, voice hardening. This isn't just about you anymore. The railroad brings progress, jobs, civilization. You can't stand in the way of that forever. Watch me. What about her? Dutch jerked his chin toward Alara. She want to be stuck on this mountain the rest of her life? Or maybe she'd prefer some of that railroad money, a chance to start over somewhere civilized. Don't speak for me, Alara said sharply, stepping forward despite Rowan's warning look. I'm a partner in this property. I own half of it, and I'm not selling either. Dutch's expression shifted to something uglier. Of course you're not. Why would you, when you've got such a sweet arrangement here? Careful, Rowan warned. Sweet little setup. Ranch, partnership papers, debt conveniently forgiven. Almost looks legitimate, doesn't it, until you remember how it started. Alara felt heat flood her face, but she kept her voice steady. How it started doesn't matter. How it is now does. And right now, you're trespassing, so either make a real offer or leave. That was a real offer. Then consider it rejected, by both of us. Dutch's horse shifted restlessly, sensing the tension. You're making a mistake. The railroad will get this land one way or another. Better to take the money and walk away while you still can. Is that a threat? Rowan's voice had gone deadly quiet. It's a fact. Eminent domain's a powerful thing, Hale. Government can take what it wants for public projects. You'll get paid either way, but fighting just makes it harder on everyone. Let them try. I've got lawyers too, and property rights, and a partner who's just as stubborn as I am. Rowan raised the rifle slightly, not aiming, just making it visible. Now get off my land before I give you a reason to leave faster. For a moment, Alara thought Dutch might push it, might force a confrontation that would end in violence. But something in Rowan's expression must have convinced him this wasn't the time. You'll regret this, Dutch said, gathering his reins. Probably, but it'll be my regret. Not yours. The riders left, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Rowan lowered the rifle only after they'd disappeared down the trail. His hands were shaking slightly. Not fear, Alara realized, but adrenaline and anger. They'll be back, she said. I know. And next time they might not ask nicely. I know that too. Alara looked at him, this man who'd built everything on this mountain and would burn it down before letting someone take it from him. Is it worth it, fighting them? You tell me. You're half owner now. Your vote counts as much as mine. She thought about it. About the ranch, the work they'd put in, the life they'd started building. About what it would mean to walk away, to take the money and start over somewhere else. It's worth fighting for, she said finally. Not because of the land itself, but because it's ours. We chose it, built it. If we let them take it without a fight, what does that say about us? That we're practical? That we're cowards? And I'm done being afraid of what might happen if I stand up for myself. Rowan studied her face for a long moment. You've changed since September. So have you. How? You're not alone anymore. Whether you like it or not, you've got someone who'll stand with you, fight with you, even when it's stupid and dangerous. Especially when it's stupid and dangerous, he corrected. And despite everything, Alara laughed. That night they sat up late making plans. Where to reinforce the property, how to secure the livestock, which lawyers in the county seat might help if eminent domain became a real threat. They spread maps across the kitchen table, marking boundaries, planning defenses. We should send word to your family, Rowan said. Let them know the debt's forgiven. They deserve to know they're free of it. Alara hesitated. I'm not sure they'll believe it. Then we'll ride down there, show them the papers. Let them see for themselves. You'd do that? After how they treated you? They're your family, and fear makes people act badly. Doesn't mean they don't love you. The generosity of it struck Alara hard. After everything, the judgment, the accusations, the doubt, Rowan was still willing to extend grace. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For being better than you have to be. For seeing the best in people even when they don't deserve it. Sarah used to say the same thing. Usually right before I did something she considered foolishly optimistic. His expression went distant. She was usually right. Can I ask you something? Alara said carefully. Do you still love her? Sarah, I mean. Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, yes, but it's different now. Less sharp, more like background music instead of the main melody. She's part of me, always will be, but she's not all of me anymore. What changed? He looked at her directly. You did. Not replacing her, that's not what I mean, but making space for something new, something that's ours, not hers and mine. Alara's chest felt tight. I don't know what we are. Partners, yes. Friends, maybe. But it feels like more than that, and I don't know what to call it. Does it need a name? Doesn't it? Why? We're building something together, making a life that works for us. Call it whatever you want, but the label doesn't change what it is. And what is it? Rowan reached across the table, took her hand. His palm was calloused, scarred, warm. It's home, he said simply. For both of us. That's what matters. Alara looked at their joined hands, his large and rough, hers smaller but just as work-worn now. 6 months ago, she would have pulled away, would have been terrified of what holding hands might mean, what it might lead to. Now she just squeezed back. They rode to town a week later, bringing the debt forgiveness papers and enough stubborn courage to face whatever judgment waited. Alara's family was at the house when they arrived, her father working in the small garden, her mother hanging laundry, Thomas nowhere in sight. Her father saw them first. He straightened slowly, wariness crossing his face. Alara, Mr. Hale. Papa. Alara climbed down from the wagon. We need to talk to you, both of you. Her mother came over, drying her hands on her apron. Is something wrong? No, something's right, actually. Alara pulled out the papers. The debt, it's forgiven. You don't owe anything anymore. Her father stared at the documents like they might bite him. I don't understand. Mr. Hale signed papers forgiving the debt, all $3,000. You're free of it. Why would he? Her father looked at Rowan. What's the catch? No catch, Rowan said. Debt's paid. You're clear. But you spent $3,000. You're just giving that up? I'm ending an obligation that doesn't make sense anymore. Your daughter's my partner now, not my debtor. Can't have it both ways. Alara's mother started crying, harsh, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Her father just stood there, looking lost. I don't know what to say, he managed finally. Say you'll stop carrying guilt that isn't yours to carry, Alara said firmly. Say you'll move forward instead of staying stuck in shame. Say you'll be my father again instead of someone who can barely look at me. He flinched. Alara, I'm not angry, Papa. I'm just tired. Tired of feeling like I have to apologize for surviving, for making the best choice I could with terrible options. She took a breath. You did what you thought was right. It went wrong. We all paid for it. But it's over now. Can we please just let it be over? Her father crossed the distance between them in 3 long steps and pulled her into a fierce hug. I'm so sorry for all of it, for putting you in that position, for not being strong enough to protect you. You did protect me, by letting me go, by trusting I could handle it. Alara pulled back, looking him in the eye. I'm stronger than you think, stronger than I thought, and I'm okay, better than okay. Thomas appeared from wherever he'd been hiding, and the family reunion that followed was messy and tearful and long overdue. They sat on the porch, all of them, including Rowan, who looked uncomfortable but stayed anyway, and talked about everything that had happened. The winter, the work, Brooke, the partnership, the future. You're really staying up there? Thomas asked. Forever? I don't know about forever, but for now, yes. It's where I belong. Her mother touched her face gently. You've changed. You're harder somehow, but also more yourself than I've ever seen you. The mountain does that. Strips away everything that's not essential. What's left is what's real. They stayed for dinner, and for the first time in months, things felt almost normal. Her father talked about the work he'd found helping repair buildings around town. Her mother shared gossip with the careful neutrality of someone who didn't want to upset anyone. Thomas complained about school with the universal frustration of 12-year-olds everywhere. And Rowan sat quietly, watching this family piece itself back together, saying little but missing nothing. As they prepared to leave, Alara's father pulled Rowan aside. Thank you, he said gruffly. For the debt, yes, but more for taking care of her, for giving her something I couldn't. She takes care of herself, Rowan replied. I just gave her space to do it. Still, thank you. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but comfortable. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Your family's good people, Rowan said eventually. They're trying. That's all anyone can do. Your father loves you, that was clear. I know, but love doesn't always protect you from the consequences of bad decisions. No, it doesn't. He glanced at her, but it helps. Knowing someone cares, even when everything's falling apart, that matters. Alara thought about Sarah, about the love Rowan still carried for her 8 years after her death, about how love could survive loss and grief and time, reshaping itself into something different but no less real. Can I tell you something? She said. Always? I'm glad it was you. That day at the church, when someone had to make an offer, I'm glad it was you and not anyone else. Even knowing how hard it would be, the gossip, the judgment, all of it, especially knowing that, because you gave me a choice when nobody else would have. You let me be something other than a victim. She paused. You let me be free, even when I was technically bound to you. That's everything. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. I made you an offer once, said you could stay as long as you wanted, that this was your home too. That offer still stands, but I'm adding to it. Adding what? This place. It's big. Too big for one person, too much work for two. We could expand, hire help, bring in more cattle, maybe even... He stopped, like he was afraid to finish the thought. Maybe what? Maybe build something that lasts. Not just for us, but for whatever comes next. Future we can't see yet, but might be worth building toward anyway. Alara understood what he was offering. Not marriage, not exactly, but commitment. A future built together deliberately, not just stumbled into by circumstance. I'd like that, she said softly. Building something that lasts. They reached the ranch as full dark settled, and for the first time Alara looked at it and felt nothing but peace. This was home. Not because she was trapped here, but because she'd chosen it, claimed it, made it hers through sweat and stubbornness and the slow accumulation of days that became a life. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made working through midday dangerous. They adjusted their schedule, up before dawn, working until the sun got too brutal, resting through the afternoon, then finishing chores in the evening cool. It gave them long afternoons together, sitting in the shade, talking about nothing and everything. Rowan taught her to play chess on a board carved from pine, pieces worn smooth by years of use. Alara read to him from her poetry book, and sometimes he'd close his eyes and listen like the words were water in a drought. One afternoon, as Alara was contemplating a particularly difficult chess move, Dutch returned. But this time he came alone, hands visible, no weapons in sight. Rowan met him at the property line, rifle nearby but not in hand. "I'm here to talk," Dutch said. No threats, no pressure, just talk." "I'm listening." "The railroad's moving forward. They've acquired every property in the valley except yours, and they're planning to route through here whether you agree or not." "Eminent domain," Rowan said flatly. "Maybe. Or maybe we can work something out. You keep the house and immediate land, say 100 acres. Railroad gets right of way through the rest. You'd be compensated fairly, and you keep your home. And if I say no, then it goes to court. Lawyers, judges, years of fighting. You might win, probably won't. Either way, it costs you everything you've built here. Time, money, peace of mind." Rowan looked back at the house where Alara stood watching from the porch. Their home, their life. "I need to discuss it with my partner," he said. Dutch nodded. "Fair enough. I'll be in town for 3 days. Let me know your decision." That night, Alara and Rowan sat at the kitchen table with maps and papers spread between them, trying to find a solution that didn't feel like losing. "We could fight," Alara said. "Take them to court, like he said." "Could. But he's right. It would destroy us. Legal fees alone would bankrupt the ranch. So we give up? We adapt. Keep what matters. Compromise on the rest." Alara traced the property lines on the map. 100 acres, the house, barn, immediate pastures. It would be enough to keep the operation going, just smaller. Smaller, but sustainable. And the railroad money would let us modernize, bring in better equipment. "Is that what you want? To compromise?" Rowan was quiet for a long time. "I want to be practical. Want to keep this place viable for the long term. Fighting when we can't win, that's just pride. And pride doesn't keep the lights on." "Sarah would have fought," Alara said quietly. "Probably. She was stubborn that way." He smiled sadly. "But you're not Sarah. And I'm not who I was when she was alive. We get to make our own choices. Our own mistakes too. Those especially." They decided to accept the offer. It hurt. Giving up land they'd worked, territory they'd claimed. But it was the smart play. The survival play. When they told Dutch 2 days later, he looked almost relieved. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "That's what we keep telling ourselves," Rowan replied. The paperwork took weeks. Surveyors came through, marking new boundaries, determining exactly where the railroad would cut through. Alara watched them work with a mix of anger and resignation. But through it all, she and Rowan kept working, kept building. The ranch might be smaller now, but it was still theirs, still home. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Alara said, "Do you ever regret it, buying the debt that day?" "No." Rowan's answer was immediate and certain. "Best money I ever spent. Even with everything that came after, the gossip, the railroad, all of it, especially because of everything that came after. He gestured at the ranch, the mountains, the life they'd built. "This is real. Hard and complicated and real. I'll take that over easy loneliness any day." Alara leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over the months. "We're strange, the way we ended up here." "Strange how?" "Most people find each other through courtship, romance, all that. We found each other through debt and desperation." "Is that worse?" "No, just different, more honest maybe. We didn't have the luxury of pretending. Had to figure out who we actually were instead of who we wanted each other to think we were." "And who are we?" Alara thought about that. About the girl who'd arrived 6 months ago, terrified and trapped. About the man who'd lived alone so long he'd forgotten how to be around people. About what they'd become through work and winter and the slow building of trust. We're survivors, she said finally. People who refuse to stay broken, who take what life gives them and make something better out of it. That's what you see? That's what I know. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and stark. Alara lifted her head to look at him. What? I love you. Not the way I loved Sarah. That was different. Softer, maybe. More innocent. This is... He struggled for the words. This is knowing exactly who you are, flaws and stubbornness and sharp edges, and loving all of it anyway. Loving you because of it, not despite it. Alara felt tears prick at her eyes. You don't have to say that just because... I'm not saying it because of anything except it's true. Has been for a while. Just took me this long to admit it. I don't know if I can say it back, Alara admitted. Not because I don't feel it, but because I don't know what love is supposed to feel like. All I know is you're the first person who ever made me feel safe and challenged at the same time, who saw me as capable instead of fragile, who gave me space to become who I'm supposed to be. That's enough. More than enough. She kissed him then, quick and tentative, testing the waters of this new territory. He kissed back, gentle and patient, letting her set the pace. When they pulled apart, Alara was crying and laughing at the same time. This is crazy, she said. We're crazy. Probably. But it's our kind of crazy. Yeah, it is. Fall came, bringing with it the first signs of coming winter. But this time Alara faced it without fear. She knew what to expect now, knew how to prepare, how to survive, how to find joy in the hardship. The railroad broke ground on their section of the valley in October, and Alara stood at the new property line watching machines tear up land that had been theirs just months ago. It hurt less than she'd expected. They'd kept what mattered. One morning in November, Alara woke to find snow falling, the first of the season. She went downstairs to find Rowan already up, coffee brewing, fire crackling. Morning, he said, handing her a cup. Morning. She stood beside him at the window, watching snow blanket the valley. Another winter. Second one together. Think we'll survive it? I think we'll do better than survive. I think we'll build something. Like what? Whatever we want. That's the point of all this. The partnership, the ranch, the life we're making. It's ours to shape however we choose. Alara thought about that. About choice and freedom, and the hard-won right to decide your own future. About how she'd started this journey as property, essentially sold to settle a debt, and had become an equal partner through nothing but refusal to be small. I want to expand, she said suddenly. The cattle operation. Maybe bring in sheep too, diversify. And I want to hire help. A few people who need work, who will treat this place with respect. Building an empire? Building security. Making sure we're not just surviving year to year, but actually thriving. Rowan smiled. I like it. Let's do it. They spent the winter planning their expansion, sketching ideas, making lists. And when spring came, their second spring together, they put those plans into action. They hired 2 ranch hands, young men from town who needed work and were willing to learn. Alara taught them the way Rowan had taught her. Through doing, through patience, through expecting competence and getting it. The ranch grew. Not to its original size, they'd lost that to the railroad, but to something sustainable and profitable, something that felt less like survival and more like success. And through it all, Alara and Rowan built their partnership into something that looked, from the outside, a lot like love. But it was stronger than romance alone. It was forged from respect, trust, and the understanding that they'd both chosen this deliberately. 2 years after that first desperate transaction at the church, Alara stood on the ridge overlooking the ranch and thought about how far she'd come. From a girl with no options to a woman who owned half a mountain. From someone defined by other people's choices to someone who made her own. The town still whispered, probably, still judged, but their opinions had stopped mattering somewhere along the way. What mattered was the ranch, the work. The life she and Rowan had built through stubbornness and spite and the refusal to let circumstances define them. You coming? Rowan called from below, already mounted on Dancer. Yeah, Elara called back, swinging on to Smoke's back. Let's go check the north pasture. They rode out together, partners in every sense of the word, building toward a future neither of them had imagined but both had chosen. And if that wasn't freedom, real, hard-won, complicated freedom, Elara didn't know what was. The mountains rose around them wild and permanent, and Elara rode through them with her head high and her heart at peace. She'd been bought once for $3,000 and a promise. But she'd bought herself back through work and courage, and the stubborn refusal to be anything less than whole. And that, in the end, was worth more than any price could measure.